We're gonna get out of this.
All right. If the appointed quorum present, everyone present, meeting adjourned.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Lynn, would you take the roll, please?
Mike Higgins.
Here.
Lori Howland. Here. Diana Johnson. Here. Tina Johnson. Here. David Schrader.
Here.
David Smith.
Here.
Doug Will.
Here.
Craig Wortman.
Here.
Tony Arnett.
Present. To the agenda, do we have any changes we need to make?
No, we do have a presenter who hasn't shown yet. So we may have to move stuff around, but they did confirm. So I'm
Okay.
hoping that it's just traffic or something.
All right. Then this brings us to public input. This is one of 2 times on the agenda where members of the public, either present here or online, can address the board. Is there anyone who'd like to be recognized at this time? No? Anyone online? No. All right. Then we will move to announcements and recognition / communication. I don't believe our student board representative is here. Is he online?
No.
No. All right. Then we will move right on to our candidate introductions for the spring election. And the first up is Mike Higgins.
Thank you, and I did not prepare anything, so, but I am here. First year was a whirlwind. I remember Dave talking about it a year ago, saying that his first year was nothing but learning, and he was not wrong. So, nothing but learning, but it's all been great, and I really appreciate everybody's support.
All right, thank you. Fred Young, next.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to thank the Board of Education and the Unified School District for the opportunity to speak here tonight. My name is Fred Yant, and many of you already know me. I'm a former board member and the current treasurer for the Watertown Family Connections Board. My wife and I have lived in the community for almost 20 years and raised 3 children in the district, the youngest of which is a junior at WHS. As I stand before you today, I want to thank you for the opportunity to potentially serve as a member of the Board of Education. It was a privilege to work alongside dedicated teachers and administrators who are committed to providing the best education possible for our students. And I believe it is the board's responsibility to clear the obstacles for them to do this. I believe we need to address the issue of literacy, not an unknown quantity for the board or the district. However, there's a concerning decline in literacy scores as grade levels increase. It needs to be an issue of focus rather than taking on the much larger task of raising literacy scores unilaterally across all grade levels. I also believe that the continued decline in student populace must be researched and approached as something not for the district to correct on its own, but as one part of the larger Watertown community. Only by working together with our elected officials, community and business leaders, and citizens can we halt this decline. Finally, as I prepared for tonight, I thought about Watertown, the school district, what we offer, and more than anything, I kept coming back to opportunity. I believe that every student has the potential to achieve great things, and it is our responsibility as a school board to provide them with the tools and opportunities to do so. I believe that is a goal that we can all get behind. I ask for your vote in this election, and I'm confident that together we can continue to make a positive impact on the lives of our students and our community. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Diane, you're next.
I did prepare a statement, just me.
You got me.
Mike. I'm Diana Johnson. I'm the mother of 2 high school students and have been married to my husband, lived in Watertown for almost 20 years. I'm a retired teacher with over 25 years of classroom experience spanning elementary, middle, and high school. Kids are my passion. When I became a board member last year, my goals were simple and straightforward: to choose the best candidate to fill the role of superintendent and to ensure that the district was held accountable for the goals that they established. Well, we hired the best possible candidate as our superintendent. Dr. Burke believes that we can and will be one of the top districts in the state. Under his leadership, he will set clear and attainable goals, and he will ensure that those goals are met. We have some work to do. First, we need to provide rigorous and relevant learning opportunities that challenge every student. This means providing multiple levels of learning in the daily activities so that all kids are challenged at their level. In terms of innovative instructional practices, we're well behind many other districts across the state. I will continue to work to bring forth ideas and opportunities for instruction and innovation so that teachers and students are given the best learning opportunities possible. Second, I believe that we need to focus on helping our children become better readers across all content areas. Additionally, I also believe we need to do a better job teaching students how to think and reason mathematically. Students with a strong background in math reasoning and in reading are not only more successful in school, but they also have greater likelihood of success in adulthood. We're facing some difficult times right now. Students are struggling more than ever, not just academically trying to recover from the shutdown of America, but mentally and emotionally as well. We acknowledge and accommodate students whose needs we can see, those who may need additional support because of a learning disability, who struggle to focus due to attention issues, or who pose behavioral challenges. We also need to acknowledge and support the struggle we don't see, those mental and emotional struggles. I will continue to be an advocate for the whole child. As a nation, we're facing some difficult times financially as well. As a farmer and business owner, I understand the necessity of a balanced budget, and we need to think creatively when times are lean. I will continue to work with the district and fellow board members to ensure we're doing the best we can for kids and what's best for the district academically and financially. I bring a unique viewpoint to the board. Given my background in education, not only am I able to understand teacher language and help decipher teacher acronyms, I'm also able to see things through a different lens, which is beneficial in helping the board make good decisions. As I reflect on my past year on the board, I'm excited for the progress that was made, and I'm hopeful for the opportunity to serve for another term. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And then we also have a registered write-in candidate. Welcome, Dan Bolton.
I am Dan Bowman. This is my wife Kathy of 43 years. And I taught the district for 30 years and I enjoyed every minute of it. And I also should say I enjoyed all 43 years of being married to her.
Start with that one.
I'm the owner operator of Balder Painting also for over 4 years. So you can see that Watertown's been very good to me and my family. And Kathy subbed in the district for over 25 years, and I subbed several years after retirement. It was there that we learned much about the district and met some great teachers. If I had to do it over, I would have taken a leave of absence and subbed because I got so many great ideas from all these other teachers. I try to make decisions based on a Christian worldview. I believe strong families make strong communities and strong cultures. Kathy and I discussed a run for the board in the past, but having been encouraged by several community members, the timing seemed right now. Not perfect timing, or I wouldn't be a write-in candidate. That combined with a certain person's retirement was the impetus. I believe in hiring great teachers and letting them teach. Top-down programs often handcuff great teachers in the classroom. This board knows Watertown better than Washington or Madison. I would like to see more opportunities for students who don't plan to go to college and are interested in the trades. And there are several other districts that have great programs out there, including Economowoc and Wauwatosa, with great plans. And I did meet someone while I was campaigning who teaches at WCTC. And she said there's a program for juniors and seniors and they get their degree and so forth. All we'd have to do is plug them in. And having talked to several contractors in the area, they are on board with having the kids available to them for longer periods of time than just 1 hour a day. And they would be the teachers. You wouldn't have to hire a teacher. They've got licensed practitioners teaching them. And when I mentioned that to people on the campaign trail, they lit up. This is a blue collar town, and I think we need to look at it that way. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, our next item is the Board of Canvassers selection and the meeting date. Again, the Board of Canvassers has a role in reviewing the ballot counts and certifying the result for the board elections. Obviously, people who are running can't be on that. But those who are not, so I'll be happy to put myself on that. We need 3 other names. We need 4 for that board of canvassers. Who else is willing to serve with me? Lori, David, and Tina. Great, thank you.
Is it specifically on the 10th? Just gotta check the calendar before I agree to, or do we know a time and date yet?
Beginning at 4 o'clock.
Second. Well, I'm willing, I gotta just make sure I don't wanna miss the meeting.
All right. And that is all we have under that item. You got set?
I'm set.
Great, thank you. This brings us to our strategic discussion item for this evening. And the first is a presentation about our out-of-district placements, and we are going to hand that over to, oh, straight over? Okay.
Want to do an introduction?
Please, yes.
Yeah, so this is Renee Aldana. She is our district attorney who supports us in factors that relate to special ed, expulsions. Just a person that we use a lot to bounce things off of. And Renee is here to explain a little bit about how decisions are made for students that are placed out of the district.
Jared, anything you wanted to say or
Um,
by way of introduction or
yeah,
just pass out some materials? Hello, everybody. First of all,
So
it's good to see you.
This is a copy of just some statutes and other legal documents that she's going to be kind of referring to. How did this conversation come about? Finance, or excuse me, the fiscal committee saw that there was an area of kind of increased programming that's been in that area, and so they were wondering a couple questions. You know, how does this programming benefit students, and how are students placed in this programming? What kind of oversight does the school district have when students are placed outside of the district? And then as it comes to other policies related to approvals of contract and so on, how does what we have support this programming and or not, and if there may be some suggestions to change. So that's where we are, and so we just wanted to make sure that the board had all the information available to make a decision.
So I'm here to provide some information, chat with you a little bit, and do an overview of the legal requirements, but then talk really about the practical implications of that, how it works in practice, not only in Watertown, but in districts across the state, and then answer any questions that you might have. I really, since Mary Hugh Walker retired, enjoyed the opportunity to collaborate with the administration here. Really appreciate the work that this district is doing. I don't see that all the time. But really working most directly with Jenny and with Aaron, have appreciated what all of you are doing for children and see some extraordinary things that I've mentioned to both of them. I sometimes talk about in presentations on a statewide basis because I've been so impressed by some of the staff and the administration that you have here and the work that you're doing. So I've got a brief handout. It's pretty dense. The reason it's dense is because I'd like for people to see what some of these materials are. But again, we can real quickly shift to some practical questions that you have and practical explanation of this. But in the materials you have in front of you, I mentioned first just a little bit about our obligation under the law to provide a continuum of alternative placement. Now, this is a law that relates to children with disabilities. The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act and the regulations say that we have to provide a whole continuum of placement. So every time we talk about a continuum of placements, we start with here in Watertown. We start in regular education courses. We start with as much time as is possible for an individual child in that setting. And then from there, we move from regular education to special education to more time in special education, lots of different options. And Erin and Jenny, if you wanna talk about some of those?
Sure. So some of our students might require to be in the special ed room more than we typically would do. And a lot of that is based on different things. It's individualized. Some might be based on behavioral concerns, safety concerns, or low academic concerns. And we go through the IEP process whenever we're looking at changing a student's programming. So on that IEP team, it's a whole group, regular ed staff, special ed staff, parent, often the student, maybe a counselor, psychologist. Sometimes there's outside people that come in depending on the involvement of the student. And because we're poised with educating them in the least restrictive environment, that may look differently, like for student A and student B. For me, it might be that my most difficult time of the day could be the start in the morning. So we might look to a more restrictive structure for that very beginning part of the day to try to judge my regulation to see what the rest of the day is going to look like. We do have some students that are on what we call a reduced day, and that reduced day is not frequent, it's more infrequent, I would say. And part of that is the Department of Public Instruction really governs why you can reduce a student's day. And when you do that, what are you looking at to see if you can increase their day after maybe some benchmarks are met or after they have proven some success? If we are dealing with a student that has county involvement, we have had some situations where we receive students from another district where they were placed out of district due to some very extreme situations. Those are very small percentages. I would say 1 to 2% of our students in special education would fall in that category. But if we receive a student from another district that's been placed out of district, of course, we review that. We look at, the why and what has happened and how is that student doing. And in the end, in trying to determine what is the least restrictive environment, we have looked for out of district placements in some of those cases for reasons that will be good for that student and for our teachers and for our other students in our building. And there's a category in which we can receive funding back called transfer of service. High cost transfer of service. And so we are
like high cost students as sort of for short, but yeah, we have lots of things for it.
So we do go through that process, and what we find is we typically receive about a third of the cost back to have a student be placed out of district. So if they're a transferring in student, we do have some means in which we could look to provide support. I will tell you that our administrators go leaps and bounds to try to keep our students, all students safe, including perhaps student A. I'm using myself as the student that is the regular brick and mortar building just isn't working. So we've added extra staff. We have looked at alternating their start time and their end time and putting different resources in play for a student. And really, the administrators in the building are the ones that should get the accolades for that, because we are altering what we're doing to try to support a student. But there are some cases where we're just not able to provide in our environments the most appropriate educational path for that student under FAPE, appropriate public education, and IDEA. And we take all of those decisions very seriously. I will tell you that we have had an increase in the number of students that we are seeing placed out of district. And that's not just Watertown. I mean, when we talk to all other people that are in these roles across our state, it's happening at a higher number of students than we've ever seen before. We do look at, can those students return to the district? So while they're placed out of district, we still have a case manager that student is still part of their caseload. And the reason being is we're still considered the LEA. So we still maintain them on our rosters. We still are getting funding for them, but we get weekly, very detailed reports and attendance reports and behavior reports and academic reports. And the schools that we partner with, we're very in tune to what they're doing academically and behaviorally. So if we see that we are able to bring a student back, we have done that. And it's done again on a very individual basis. Me being student A, we may recommend part days at their out-of-site placement and part days back in our district. And we work on that and we see how that goes. And that might increase. Whereas if I'm using Josh as student B, his transition back could start full days. So there's no way to predict. I can't give you like, this is what we always do, because it's very student specific. And again, I will tell you, it's a very heavy heart when we go to make these decisions. It's hard for our educators because they really have tried to do everything they possibly can. It's extremely hard for the student and it's hard for the families to be going that different pathway. One of the pieces that adds an extra expense to this, of course, is transportation, because we are obligated to transport when students are placed out of district. So we have all different scenarios we look at, and we always look at the dollar amount and what is the most economical and how do we make that work for a student. I will also say that when we go through the expulsion process, which I know that's not an easy process for you as a board or for us as a school district, but sometimes it's the right next step that we need to take. And if a student has a disability, we are obligated to educate that student, even if we're recommending expulsion for them due to FAPE and IDEA. So the students that we expel that have special ed, we often look to alternative placements for them because we're obligated to educate them. And we have talked about, the cost of a teacher and the cost of paras, what makes more sense? And quite honestly, we're hard pressed to find staff that we could hire that are willing or still teaching in that way, if I can say it to you as plainly as that. There used to be a period of time when there were teachers that were certified in the category of EBD, emotional behavioral disability, and we don't have that anymore. All special ed teachers are certified as cross-categorical teachers. So finding the staff is really a difficult challenge and impossible in many cases. Then you have to find where would we house individuals. And there was, before Jenny and I were in these roles, there was a period of time where they had a room in this building where some of the students were educated. We had a period of time where there was a room at the high school where students were educated that were more challenging for due to their disability, couldn't be in the typical environment. And there were some successes and there were not successes. There was a period of time, and Dave, you would remember this, I think there was a CISA 2 person that came here from Janesville that worked with this. The part that gets challenging there is that whole piece of IDEA and FAPE. We can't like say, student A, meaning me, we're only going to give you a teacher 2 hours a week or 3 days a week for 2 hours, because that doesn't give them access to a free appropriate public education, even though they're a more complex individual. So that's kind of what I would share. And we try to do everything we can.
And that's what I see. I mean, this is a statewide issue, right? Where you have a lot more students who are in need of more. And again, the starting point is all the types of things that Erin has been talking about. And Jenny's got a lot of examples too. including things like conducting functional behavioral assessments to figure out, what is it that we could do within school to be able to help a student self-regulate so that we don't have behaviors that could potentially be dangerous, for example. Lots of types of things that we do. And I can get back to some of this too, but please go ahead. with the
Question, if you say it's a statewide issue and they're open and rolling out of our district, then everybody's going other directions. Where are they going? Who's taking up the slack?
Yes.
If we're gonna take in some, but we're open and rolling them out, and you say, Aaron, we have 1 to 2% that we're picking up out of district, am I?
Right, and do you want to address?
Yeah,
that
they're
first? I
not
talked about
necessarily open
versus-
enrolled kids into us. They're students that may move into our district or may be placed in a foster home in our district. So they're part of our
We're
responsibility.
responsible, yeah, we're
We're
responsible.
we go through what's called a best interest determination meeting to determine what's in the best interest of the student, and that involves the district they lived in, and if they're in foster care, and we go through this whole process to determine which is their resident district and which is the LEA
There's a lot.
district.
Right now, we're just talking about the kids who, so take, for example, a resident student, they could be a resident for whatever reasons. Open enrollment rules are completely different, and if a student had these kinds of needs under open enrollment, the district would very likely determine, well, we don't have the capacity to be able to serve that student, and that student would go back to home district as a result. So we're talking about students we know we are responsible for, and this process is, yes, we have to provide a continuum of placements, but we're always going to start, and we're going to try as hard as we can with all the tools that Jenny and Aaron have described and can describe to keep students in district. But there could come a time where when we're going down that continuum, we have to move from an elementary school within the district to something outside. It's very rare, and it's rare because of the fact that, we have that obligation to try here. However, with the statewide issues, nationwide issues regarding mental health, regarding, just behavioral struggles and safety issues, then it turns out that in many, many districts, there are more of these alternative placements. But the question then, I think, for lots of people is, how do we get there? Who makes that decision? So if you look at this next section here at section 2, and this is state law, it talks about who makes the decision. And you can see here, it's the IEP team, the Individualized Education Program team. And I list in section 3, who's a part of that team. So this is, a combination of state law saying, okay, we have to have placements made by the IEP team, and federal law saying, here's who is on the IEP team. So lots of different people who know the student best is what I think would normally be argued in terms of why are these people the participants. And that list is here. Parents are on that team, and you can see parents are listed first. They're an important part of that team. They're an important part of the decision-making process. You can see we also have regular education teacher, if the child is in regular education, a special ed teacher, a representative of the public agency, meaning of the school, who has these qualifications. And one of those qualifications is that they're knowledgeable about the availability of resources of the school. So there's going to be a person on the team who meets all those qualifications. They're knowledgeable about the resources, but they're also knowledgeable about the child, and about the program and about special education. And part of what we do in getting teams ready when they're thinking about a potential alternative placement is that we train them. We provide a lot of training, either training that's general so that everybody knows about it, or if a team is considering an alternative placement, we're going to train them because their legal obligation is to start again with, could this be done? Could we serve this child within our own school environment? So a lot of times there's training. Have you done enough here? Do we need to bring in resources? CISA too, Jenny can attest to that, has been a fantastic resource in helping to keep children in district, because maybe somebody, an expert from CISA 2 can come in and give staff some ideas about educationally, behaviorally, what could be done to help keep a child with us instead of considering an alternative placement. So those are the people who are making that decision. There's a couple others who are listed as well who may be a part of that process. But it's like Aaron mentioned, expulsion. If a child with a disability is expelled from school, federal law says that that child is entitled to receive services post-expulsion. But when a board is writing an expulsion order for a child with a disability, the board can't decide what that those post-expulsion services are going to look like. Because federal law says it needs to be this team of people, including the parents, who know the child making that decision. And this is very similar, and it's one of those limited circumstances where, it's rather than a board decision or a committee decision or a one person's decision, it's that IEP team that's making the decision instead. So we do a lot of prep before we would ever get to that spot. Like I said, generally, so that people know about the need to try to find that least restrictive environment for the child, but also specifically when a team is thinking maybe we want to go that direction, because we need to be really cautious that we've done all we can do before we get there.
In these decisions, and things like that, one of the things that I become concerned about, is, because I've been a special education paraprofessional, so I'm familiar, but I'm also a parent as well. And so, some of the things that I become concerned about is the effect of, yes, I understand that these children have rights of, to be in a least restrictive environment in their education and things like that. However, what about the other 30 kids in that environment and their right to a safe, and uninterrupted education? So what is...
One of the reasons we see more alternative placements, because when you look at the standard for how do we address behaviors, we're talking about what do we need to do either within school, or if we can't do it within school, in an alternative placement potentially, if the student's behavior not only impacts that child, but also the learning of others. It's right there in the standard. And so that's part of the analysis and part of the calculation. And I would say that most of the alternative placements that I see, the large, majority, I don't want to put a percentage on it, but large majority is because of these safety concerns that you're expressing, behavior and safety, versus we don't really see them for academic issues, for example. They really do surround safety of not only that student, but like you're saying, of all students.
Greg?
Do you suppose you see some sort of, I don't want to look at it like this, but unfortunately, I want to make the best decisions for the students that are, that we need to serve. And so that's the lens that I'm looking at it through. But do you see a component of which what districts might consider, well, we want to give this kind of an individual resource to this child until it gets to the certain point, and to try, because there's an expense associated to go to an outside source, and where that, have you seen districts try to come up with some sort of a break point by which a decision would be made to do some other?
Well, see, that's the problem, is that one of the key features of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act is that, like Aaron mentioned earlier, every single decision has to be individual. So it's really challenging to come up with guidelines or policies to say, this is the time when we go to an alternative placement, because of the fact that every decision needs to be made by a team of these people who know the child best for that particular child under those particular circumstances. And always, even if a child is, placed outside of the district for a period of time, always, the goal is, because the law requires least restrictive environment, right? We should have to keep looking at, can the student come back? Can the student come back? Can the student come back? But again, it's one of those individualized things. So when we try to say like, oh, the student can come back when the student's done A, B, and C, that gets tricky too, because we have to be constantly watching this individual child in this individual circumstance and figuring out, as an IEP team, what's going to be best.
Dave, did you have a question?
Who typically fills the number 4 role in here for our district?
Oh, the LEA rep. I've seen it different based on if it's an alternative placement situation, my bet is that one of these two is going to be in the room. I'm not aware of situations where you'd be considering alternative placement and two wouldn't be there.
100% of the time, we're considering alternative.
We've been there all along the journey.
Correct.
We just don't show up at that meeting.
Correct.
We're very aware and have been working with the staff and bringing the CISA people in and we have someone that we work with that's not with CISA, but to come in and try to support us. And we've started that. Some of these decisions take time, and you're trying to recraft a schedule and a routine, and you see some success with some of that when you do alter, and then you try a little more, and in the end, Jenny and I are always at the table with these decisions.
Now it's a collaboration to make sure that, I mean, it is really like not just a legal obligation, but I think that both Jenny and Aaron feel it's an ethical obligation to make sure that we've done all we can, and, you know, just to make sure there are no trouble spots in terms of the staff's implementation, and whether there's anything in terms of more creative problem solving that could be done with those outside agencies.
Renee, can you go into, when we get into these enrollment agreements with these different organizations, can you talk about how our continued oversight happens within that agreement and with the programming that's happening, so that our board understands, you know, what control do we still have if we're going to send these students to a different organization for their education?
I feel pretty strongly about the level of control that we have, because we still remain the LEA, the local educational agency, responsible for that child receiving an appropriate education. So whereas in the past, some districts would say, oh, you know, student is alternatively placed, there we are, and then we'll see in a year. That's never been a good idea. Recently, DPI has been more active in noting that that's a bad idea, that we should, and they issued a bulletin that specifically says, here's the, you should have constant communication, you should be getting progress reports. From a fiscal perspective, I typically recommend that if there's an option where there's not a lump sum payment, but you know, it's gradual, so that if that placement isn't working out, or if that placement isn't doing what they said that they were going to do to serve the child, and the child isn't getting an appropriate education, then we can say, well, we'll be looking for another placement, whether it's bringing the child back or whether it's finding another placement that will provide something appropriate.
I get daily communication about any of our students who are placed in the district, and so does the case manager, and the case manager remains the case manager here in the district. So the special ed teacher who was a special ed teacher when they were in the district maintains that. And we get daily communication about how that is going. We get bi-weekly reports, and then we also get quarterly reports as well, based on what their IEP goals are.
And we still meet and hold IEPs, so that's typically not a student that we meet once a year. That's a student that we're having meetings as student A needs or as student B needs. It varies per student.
Some schools will push back and say, we want to take control of the IEP, we want to write the IEP, and we're aware of some schools that do that, and we will not agree to that.
Great.
I think that a question that routinely comes up in some of our discussions is what type of negotiations when it comes to services that we're seeking financially, do we have control of? As in, what kind of rates can we try to have a reasonable expectation so that we can try to plan around those costs? And if we're looking at comparables for providers, if that is even an option, how do we compare provider to another provider so that we can financially plan for those children's needs?
Yeah, if it's apples to, so, you know, you look at what the law says on that, in terms of the IDEA and supplementary state law, if there's one option that costs more but is inappropriate for a child and the other one costs less, or, you know, if it costs less but it's inappropriate, the other one is appropriate and it costs more, it's not like we can say, oh, we're just gonna provide the placement that's less expensive. However, if we're comparing apples to apples, then we're in a situation where an IEP team might say, you know, we think this is an appropriate placement, here's another appropriate placement. And if you're apples to apples, truly apples to apples for a child, then there is an opportunity to say that, you know, that could factor in. But that's unusual that we're apples to apples, because right now it's really hard to even find an alternative placement that has space or that's a good match for a child. So that's a challenge to begin with. There have been times where if the family is represented by an attorney or an advocate, and we're looking to find an alternative placement that everybody agrees is appropriate and that the parents are having their voice, as, you know, as we would expect that they would in that decision-making process. We've worked with families, attorneys, and advocates and jointly approached an alternative placement, saying we think that this is appropriate and essentially cut a deal. You know, could the tuition be different? Is it different this way or this way? What if it's this way? That's less likely to occur these days because right now we're looking for places that even have space at all and can be a good match. But it's not impossible, and it's something that we routinely did in the past, just a little bit more challenging now, given that there's not as many placements available.
Renee, I think the last question I think that our board had that I delivered to you through Aaron was Aaron had sent you a policy, and in our policy, it talks about purchases over $20,000, getting purview of the fiscal committee, and then, you know, onto the board for approval. That doesn't quite happen when it comes to these agreements. Can you explain the why and how, and is there something that you would give us guidance to do to make sure that we're following policy and or have the correct policies in place?
Yeah. So I know the policy you're talking about. I took a look at it. I'm familiar with it. Many districts have similar policies. And there are, of course, going to be exceptions to policies. And one exception is that federal law requires something different. So in this case, the IDEA requires that decisions regarding alternative placements not be made by school board, but rather be made by the IEP team with really solid training and understanding of what their obligations are, but nonetheless by the IEP team. So typically in policies of this nature, we would just include a sentence that talks about, you know, unless otherwise required by state or federal law. And then it allows this exception. And if there are other exceptions, many of them are under the IDEA, then we would be in a similar position where your policy would be consistent with federal law.
So I expected that. I mean, that, yeah, that's
right.
It's protected information, simply going to stay away from it. Even under that circumstance, have you seen other districts have what I'll call a master services agreement type approach in place with a given institution that says, okay, we're going to have placements occur, each one is individual, but there are some rules for the road overall that apply to all of them?
Yeah, you know, I haven't seen any given school district make so many alternative placements in one location that it would be even larger districts, you know, where it would be a situation where they'd say, we're going to sit down with you and hammer this out. Given the fact that there are very few kids in any given place at one time. But if there were several students going to the same place over time, then it would make sense to sit down with them and say, here's what we want to do. And I'll give you an example. Not a lot of students went to this one location, but there is one location that had the practice of taking the IEP over, and they still do have that practice of trying to take the IEP over and say, we're gonna create this IEP. You're not gonna do it anymore. Well, that doesn't make sense for lots of reasons. And so this individual district sat down with them and said, yeah, you know, for us, it's gonna work differently, and but the leverage is different than it used to be, given the fact that there's such a scarcity of placements.
For example, what you brought up before, the idea of not doing lump sum billing. And even a master services agreement that simply spoke to, here's how you're going to invoice us, here's how we're going to pay you.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And here's agreements about liability. I mean, the common features of master service agreements have done with other.
Right. So it might not be the same across the board because we only have one or two students there. But yes, absolutely. We would typically have agreements that explain all of those types.
We do have agreements that say we're not doing a lump sum, the liability, all that with the individual alternative organizations that we read, we sign, we sometimes send to our attorney if we're questioning it.
So are those individual based on cases, or is that an overarching agreement?
They're individual, but they're the same agreement with one school. Like if we had more than one student at one school, it's the same agreement. It just has student A on one and student B on the other. Sorry.
So we, I guess that's a confusion to me, because up until this point, we were being told we do not have agreements
I don't
in place.
being part of that conversation.
And now you're saying so there is a formal.
I think what I'm hearing is that there's common language used in each individual student's placement agreement.
But that there is an individual placement agreement that talks about the expectation for the school and the expectation for us. And the financial for us, the timing of it and all of that is.
The general one, the general agreement. that-
Well, I was told that there wasn't any agreements, period.
Yeah.
Whether there's general or individual.
Individual general agreement.
So for example, if you look at, a form that the district has that you use for everybody, for example, student records. If you want to share student records between a physician and the district, we have a form. And that's the district's form. And somebody will give us all sorts of stuff and we'll say, no can do, you need to fill out our district's form. Whereas with individual schools, there will be different agreements. And we don't see all the agreements, like Aaron said, sometimes if there's a question or whatever, then we'd send them over, we would take a look at it and see if it fits an individual circumstance. I don't know if that helps at all, because it's not like one agreement that we have for all providers.
Right,
Well,
the difference is in that, I think the confusion came around the idea of, what does our contract look like? Well, it's not a contract or an overarching contract. There are a number of separate placement agreements that outline for that student, the cost for that student, the kinds of education that they're required through the IEP, and those kinds of things. So there's not really a contract. There are specific educational placement agreements that outline all of those things within the agreement.
Well, what I'm asking is if we're taking student A, Erin, and sending her to Lad Lake, is there an agreement that's signed by an administrator and by Lad Lake?
Yes, that's that placement.
Is contractual about that placement.
Yes.
And we're saying that is done on a standard agreement form that Lad Lake provides with some fill in the blanks.
Correct, Lad Lake.
Right.
And then when we go to
a different
Richardson
placement,
School, it's
right.
gonna be a different document. It probably looks very similar, but is a different document. But somebody
That's
with an
correct.
administrative title signs that and somebody from that institution signs that each time.
That's correct.
Okay, that's new news.
But that document is what is protected by federal law that should not be coming in front of a board. Those individual documents should not be coming in front of a board.
That's correct. Yeah, if we get into some kind of situation where there's litigation, there might be exceptions to that, but as a general rule,
We don't want that.
we wouldn't have, we don't want that, but as a general rule, the administration would typically not find a legitimate educational interest in sharing those unless something else extraordinary happened.
All right, other questions on the process? How students are identified, how it's determined that possible external placement should be considered, how we keep up and in sync with what is occurring in those external placements, and the nature of the paperwork that is created as a part of this process. Other questions about that at this point? That was our objective this evening.
It's just to educate, not to figure out where we're going, per se.
It's to educate.
And I think there was one recommendation for possible change in our policy
Did you hear that come out?
to be more inclusive.
So we'll refer that to the policy committee for
Craig has a question.
consideration. Correct.
I just had one, I just wanted to make sure I clearly understood some of the discussion so far. We can, as a district, however, make conditions here locally more conducive to be compatible with an IEP in order to try to prevent, or not prevent, but to give the student the best opportunity for success right here before we go out and send them to Lad Lake. And that might mean an additional use of resources to make that sort of thing happen.
Lots of supports in district to try to make that happen. So we wouldn't do a policy that says, here's the lockstep, but all of the types of things that you heard Aaron talk about, functional behavioral assessments, behavioral intervention plans, making sure that there's a lot of knowledge among staff members regarding all the things of training so that they know what they're trying, and then having Jenny and Aaron supervising that so that they'll go in and say, nope, there's more stuff that you need to do. So that's really a significant effort here.
Yeah,
So-
and to, we literally exhaust the skill set and level of programming that we can provide to the best of our ability. Why? Because we truly believe like a student's least restrictive environment is the school district that they go to. That being said, sometimes the alternate placement, it has something either physically or skills-based that we can't provide. For instance, we may have a student who, is a runner. Tries to get out, and once they get out of a place, if they're familiar enough with the environment, they may run home, which is unsafe. But if the alternate placement is 40 miles away and they're not familiar with that, that limits that choice for the student and helps change that behavior set and puts them in a place where they can start learning, because they're not in control of that physical situation, where they still maintain some control, especially if they know their surroundings. So again, that's just only one example of a number of different ones we could go through. But we do absolutely try to exhaust every possibility within our means, and even if it has cost to it, we add some of those in place to make that happen. But
I think my observation has been that if there's a certain circumstance where behaviors lend itself to physical violence and things of that nature, there's to a point to which we can no longer really serve that child to the best of their ability. And I completely understand the need for the service.
And I just think, again, what I'm hearing is, it's not as, I'll say, simple as we can create a checklist of we're gonna do A, then B, then C, then D, then E, then F, and if all those, none of those work, then we're doing this. Because in some cases, you go straight to F, you bypass A through E, because they're not appropriate. And we try F and it doesn't work, and then we have to look at something different. It's not gonna be as straightforward as what I'd like to be able to put in policy. One, two, three, four, five.
It's so much easier.
Dave?
So from a legal perspective, and I just put this, last month, we spent over $120,000 on outsourced education. So I'm just trying to put that in some of the perspective of this. Is it, from a fiscal perspective, is it legally something that we do of saying, we have, to get our administration to say, we have signed a contract for a new student with XYZ firm, and here's the financial ramifications of that, and that can go to our fiscal committee to be at least aware of and understanding that this is happening?
So every district works out separately how they're gonna make people aware of the financial impact of things, but in terms of like a case by case, like thumbs up or thumbs down, the problem is that would come into conflict with the people who are supposed to be making the determination regarding that placement, the IEP team. And that's where
No, not asking us to give approval for it, but
Okay.
to be informed of it.
Just the knowledge of it, because we're on fiscal and we have to run a budget. And like right now, we're 223% above our budget.
Okay, I see.
So we're trying
So can
to
we
run our budget, and without knowing,
So here's the hard part. We don't know at any given point if we're at this many kids or this many kids, right? So it's hard to plan for, and I totally understand that and respect that. But I don't think, and I need your legal advice on this, like, it's now March 20th. Let's say March 24th, we're in a situation where we have another student that we're looking at placing. I don't know if we can bridge that confidentiality issue of, okay, we have another student we're placing out of district. And the reason why I say is we hear about these kids, right? I mean, you hear from your own lives and your community connections. I just don't know how we would.
It's the problem is it's dependent, and it, like you said, like the community connections, and so there are times when, because there are so few students, if you say to anyone, we think we're going to a private placement, and if people could, even if you don't say the name, if people know who that is, that's personally identifiable information, and then there's a question that needs to be answered about whether there's legitimate educational interest in what's happening to that student. So, I mean, it's attention. There's no question that it's attention, but I think that's where you hear the hesitation, because if you walk in and say, there's a student who's going to be placed, and everybody knows that there's a student who's had some significant difficulties with self-regulation, might be a safety risk, then it's possible that that information would be shared and it's supposed to be confidential under state and federal law. So that's where we get into that tension.
And I understand that, but I also understand from the board's perspective, looking at, someone's got to pay the bill.
Right.
And so if you don't know what's happening, so is it possible to look longitudinally in terms of, okay, in the last year we had 5 placed, in the last previous year we had 7 placed. So now we can get a ballpark, it can then be budgeted within, and then, you know,
And there's
put
flexibility.
a little slush with, you know, there's not a lot of slush, but somehow it has to be somehow.
Exactly, rather than talking about individual students or advising that there's an individual student, here's generally what we see, here's generally what the budget is, understanding we need to go up and down. And that high cost kid fund that we were talking about before, where in recent years, there's been, you know, the district has been accessing that and can continue to access that further. So that could also bring.
To extend that a little bit further, is there any hindrance to the administration expressing to the board, based on our current caseload, here's what we can project outward for the remaining portion of the year for this area of expense? Is there any issue with that?
You don't have any issue with that, right? You guys don't, you can just say, here's a projection, because that's just a projection, not based on
Right.
we're bringing an individual student.
This is what we, based on our current caseload and where we are right now.
That coming
our places we are right now,
fiscal quarterly, and
here's what
saying,
we
here's what
project
we're
for
projecting.
the next 3 months, to the end of the fiscal year.
Yep.
And then, again, as part of our budgeting process, if we make assumptions, and again, we commit to, we want to bring these students back as quickly as they can, but if we make assumptions that those placements continue, this is what that would look like for next year.
That would be especially doable if we didn't start down the road of, you know, here's how many students in elementary. I mean, like if we
It's not, it's just,
if we did a lump.
that's not what it is. It's just one lump, here's the
Yeah.
lump sum in this area. And just trying to get some kind of projection for it of next year, we think, again, based on where we are this year, we think it's going to be 50% higher. Or we think, no, in fact, and you all know, right?
Yeah.
And you know that a couple of students.
What we can do is we can share, here's where we're at, and this is what we anticipate the expenditure being for the next 3 months.
Yeah. I
If
mean,
we stay status quo, which
Right.
means no more going out or none coming back,
Right,
this
the-
would be your projection for
Right,
next
yeah,
year.
exactly,
But
right. And
we can't be held to, if another
Of course
student
not.
needs to go or
Conditions will
another
change.
student comes back. But
Right.
yes.
That's what it is. It's just.
But right now, we're in the dark,
Unbest information.
completely, so we're trying to,
And
yeah.
nobody is intentionally.
No, I'm not saying that, but
They're
but we're-
very difficult situations.
we're holding this intention of, it's protected, we can't know. And the board is saying, well, what can we know? We understand that there's things that we can't know, and we need to respect that. But the answer can't be just, well, this is an IEP situation, you just gotta keep your nose out of it. You can't know anything. We gotta figure out what can we know.
And not trying to change it.
Not trying to change
the
it, we're
outcome,
just trying to be informed.
Make your best assumptions on current conditions and what would you project. That's, we're just trying to get a sense of that.
Just another piece, can you answer the question? In our world, costs have gone up significantly, the percentage, whatever. Is that the same with this? Have the costs been pretty consistent for the last 3 to 5 years? They've gone, you know, because I was saying, okay, if we look at the last 2 to 3,
Right.
if you can use that as a baseline, but if costs have jumped up 20%, 50%, you know, then we just need, you know, how do you get a baseline?
Well, and there's other factors too that really make things different. Transportation that Erin mentioned earlier, some parents will transport and we can do a parent contract for that. Other parents are not able to transport and the transportation is more costly. And so like, you know, there's a lot, those are the types of factors, the increasing transportation costs are through the roof. Everybody says that we've got extra bus riders here in the district. We've got people trying to do lots of things to make transportation work. So that one's been another factor in addition.
Aaron just said, in our history, we did more things internally. Well, if we did more things internally and had staff here and other things, and it was at budget X, and hey, in the last 5 years, that's tripled. Well, maybe we need to go back and look at other ways to do. There's gotta be some point, there's gotta be some economical point of saying, hold on, this was the path that we were always on, but the economy of it has put it here, and maybe it makes sense that we look at it creatively
Yeah,
as well.
across the board, student needs have been, whether people are addressing student needs internally or externally, the costs everywhere have increased. And then, as Aaron mentioned before, one of the huge challenges, as you all know, is staffing. So, you know, that's, sometimes you've got the budget to pay someone to do it, but you can't find the person to do it. So there's just all those factors. I'd say even for the districts that have in-house programs, the cost of their in-house programs are increasing significantly as well, because you got to pay people more to take the jobs, to find the people to do the jobs, and then you need more people, because the staffing, you know, used to be that you could have one special ed teacher maybe working with a number of students, and now because of those needs, we have more staffing needs, more people.
I'm just thankful our legal fees are going down.
We'll do the best we can. We'll do the best we can.
Anything else on this subject for this evening? All right, thank you very much.
Absolutely. If you have any follow-up questions, administration knows where to find me, and I'm happy to follow up.
All right. Thank you. Next topic on strategic discussion is a presentation by Dr. Burke on needed programmatic supports.
So let me start off the presentation by kind of talking about where did this conversation start. During my interview process, and shortly thereafter, the board asked me to take a breadth and width of the program that we offer for students, and see if we have indeed everything in place that we might need to be successful towards our strategic plan, and some other things that I might uncover or hear as I'm putting my ear to the wind and finding out what's out there. So how did I go about finding the areas of need that we have? I entered into a review process. A lot of that started with onboarding discussions that I had with individual board members as they were able to meet with me, and or the board as a whole, as I was hearing them at different committee meetings or board meetings, expressing concerns or interests related to areas where we might be able to do better. Also sought community input, met with a lot of either former board members, other people in the community, our community leaders, had multiple meetings and lunches, just hearing from them and asking them, people in business and other things, what are you hearing about our school district? Where do you think we can have some more support, or where do you think we can improve things for our students? Also, multiple discussions within our administrative team, individual administrators, asking them about programming that's happening in their buildings or programming that they're in charge of district-wide, seeing where their stresses might be, where they feel like maybe they're having some difficulties because they're being pulled in a number of different directions or other things. Also, staff and parent concerns as it relates to phone calls, parent surveys that we've done, or other things that we've done, as well as sitting with staff members or having the casual conversation in the hallway, and or other meetings that I have with staff to get that feedback. So what I'm about to share with you is there were a number of areas that people kept saying we need to think about some support in. And these ideas kind of keep rising to the top. So regardless of support, I'm going to tell you that in what I've heard so far, we do have questions of concern through the IEP process. We just spent the last half hour talking about 1% of our most needy students. And how do we work things around that? How does that happen? How does that whole process work and go? But we do have questions on the IEP process Even as much as, are we able to timely turn around IEPs, have meetings scheduled? When we have meetings scheduled, people being pulled in multiple directions, having at last minute, having to change even the LEA that was in charge for that meeting that day, or other things, because those things do happen. Also, behavioral supports of students. A number of concerns about, things like bullying. We've been working on a bullying policy as one of our supports that we're looking at changing. But definitely some concerns about behavior supports. And when behavior gets to be too much from a student or group of students in an individual building, central office administration having to go into the buildings to act as extra support, and or get coaches from other places like CISA or other places to help in regard to those behavioral supports. I myself, on a couple of occasions, have had to be that support for some students, whether it's taking them down to the library and engaging in some relief for the teacher or the other administrators that have been working with that student, or other things. Curriculum review and supports. Many of our staff are concerned about the pace at which the new curriculums are coming in and or being developed. Some are saying too fast, some are saying too slow, some are saying I need more help in. Some people are needing to understand the materials better, those kinds of things. So curriculum review and supports has been something that's been rising to the top of the list. Measuring those curriculum reviews or the curriculum and other things like attendance, staff engagement data, student engagement data, parent engagement data. We've been talking a lot about data and the importance of data, but we do have a limited tools and supports to really go through the data to the level that we really want to and make sense of it and talk about how it can help direct our programming. Fidelity is support programming that we have in other structures. What I mean by support programming is our programs like our EL programming for English learners, our advanced learner program, dual language program, our STEM programming, or other programming that we have in relation to anything outside of the general curriculum and or innovation that we're doing, making sure that when we bring in new innovation and other things, and or we're working with those specific programs designed for those specific students to engage in, that we do that with fidelity and that we maintain the level of fidelity throughout that. And when you're being innovative, and we have a number of innovative programs here, staying on top of that innovation track and making sure that we're adjusting as we go through that has been a question that's come up. Are we appropriately adjusting? And then lastly, questions of alignment and role confusion. When people are getting pulled to things to support things that aren't germane to their job description, it does produce some role confusion. Or when there's shared responsibilities over programs or other areas, and the answer is, to the question, well, whose job is this anyway, or who's the person in charge? And you say, well, we are. That doesn't sit well sometimes, and or goes into a lot more explaining as to where we need to be. And so again, these are just some of the things that have risen to the top of the list that we as an administrative team have been talking about, you as a board have been talking about, and saying, how can we do that better? Like, how can we engage into those things so that we can make sure that our experience for our students and our families is much better than it is right now? Because sometimes these things, in the best of the ability that we're doing to implement them, and I think we are doing a really good job of trying to implement these with the resources that we have, but it does bring up other questions about, can we do better? So I have a solution here. I say the needed solution equals more supports. The do more with less. Thank you, President Arnett, for handing that out. This is hard to see on the screen, so I do have a handout that is going around. Hopefully that makes it a little easier for you. I'm going to say on the handout it's not as easy either, but it's a lot of information on one sheet, but I needed it to be on one sheet so that you weren't confused. So I will go at whatever space or speed we need to make this discussion happen. I really think that it's hard to do more with less. And I know that when this board hired me, I really got the impression that not only do we have a high set of standards and a strategic plan aimed to those high set of standards, but that this board will engage in the community and try to get whatever resources we need to make sure that we are on that pathway. The solution that I have here for more supports, I'm not asking for any more money for. The supports that I'm putting in front of you today average about 1 to 1.2% of our budget. What I'm asking for is that the board sees this as the first priority in the 2023-24 budget. And if we do this, we will make a budget that takes this as the first consideration, meaning we will still get to the balanced type budget that we were looking for with all of the other additions and subtractions, possible new revenue or not coming from the state, possible reductions in staff or not as needed by enrollments or whatever other things, or any other impacts on raises, benefits, or anything else that comes into the budget making as we move forward. This impact will be the first decision we make along that path if we believe it's important. And I'm telling you, I think this restructuring and adding of supports within our administrative team and moving forward, I think we'll get to what it is you're looking to do as a board and we as a community of educators and as a community for our students. I think these supports are needed based on the information that we got, but also doable in a way that's not going to add to our overall expenditures. That being said, we'll go through a couple of things. The large 3 gray boxes on the top indicate 3 director positions. We currently have 2 directors as well as an assistant superintendent in the educational services area of our school district. I'm proposing that we get rid of some role confusion and we realign some of their supports. In doing so, instead of having a situation where we have 2 directors that do special education student services as well as curriculum, either at the elementary level or the high school level, separating those 2 job responsibilities to 1 person, meaning a K-12 student services and special education person and a K-12 director of curriculum and instruction. Okay, you can see the proposed titles on those, and you can see the key roles and responsibilities in the budget areas that they would be in control of. But that's the first thing I would do. We talked a lot in administrative team about going down to 2 main roles and having a lot more support under them. But as we're seeing an explosion in some of our international students, our eCampus, and talking about really this district, and one of the strengths that we've had as a district is its innovation and different types of programming. Having somebody continue the vision of that and be a focus on that was important. Putting that under the other 2, even with supports, we thought might have us lose sight of something that we thought was very important to us as a district. So therefore, we have a 3rd director. Instead of doing away with the assistant superintendent position and having more coordinators underneath, we're going with fewer coordinators underneath in this plan that's in front of you, and keeping a 3rd director position, not an assistant superintendent, but a 3rd director position. That 3rd director position will be in the area of technology, innovation, strategy, and data. Okay. Moving to the next layer, we have 2 administrative assistants who help those directors in everyday programming, communication, you name it. Those are a vital support role to that director in that position. I'm suggesting we bring in a third person to help with that third director. And I will say that that discussion was actually at the forefront of some communication as I came on into the district about another clerical support here at central offices that would have gone along the lines of to one of the teaching and learning support people. That is either at the elementary or secondary level, because currently elementary and secondary share a support person. So we think it's vital to bring in that role. You'll see that's in yellow. That's the first ad I'm talking about. So when you see yellow, you see additions that we don't currently have in place. If you follow under that technology person, technology innovation strategy and data person, that coordinator, you'll see two gray boxes. Those two gray boxes are people that we already have in place. There may be some small strategic changes to their overall job description, but those people, one in charge of, that would be in charge of basic technology and networking, we already have in place. We already have somebody in place that somewhat supports our eCampus and environment there. And we would be adding a couple of things and or changing a couple of things around in how they would function under that director. Very few changes though. Then we would have an additional third column. That third column would be somebody who would be dealing with our student management system, possibly our LMS or our LMSs. Those are our learning management systems like our Google Classroom, okay? I hope that helps. And Skyward is our student data system, which tracks all of our student data on enrollment and everything else. That person would be in charge of that. All of our data around student instruction and the student enrollment processes, as well as district assessment coordinator and person who can help us navigate those data discussions. We're looking for a very specific, specialized individual, one who really gets computer systems as well as data to help in that regard. That would be the ad in that column. The ad in the middle column, that would be helping our director of curriculum and instruction, would be a coordinator of curriculum and educational programs. You can see that there's stuff for EL and dual language, making sure that those programs are continuing to have the support they need and running in that fashion. Most of the title work would be supported through that curriculum coordinator. Again, oversight by the director for that position. And then things like transfer of service and other things. Transfer of service is when students come to us from a different school, and if they have educational need, for instance, let's say they're an EL student, and we have to provide them with extra supports, we can apply for what's called transfer of service dollars to make sure that those students get the support they're needed. Maybe they come from out of state or out of country, have educational need outside of an IEP. These aren't students that would be with a disability. They would be outside of an IEP but still have some educational need. This person would help make sure we're tracking those students and getting the support, as well as the funding that revenue stream that would come in possibly for that student. You also see a green box there. Now the green box indicates money that has been set aside within our ESSER funds to look at hiring a advanced learner coach and or coordinator. Okay. Now, if it's just coordination, that's a lesser dollar amount. If it's a coordination and coaching, and what I mean by coaching is more of the closer face-to-face student work, more direct work with the teachers and ensuring those DEPs are communicated and planned and working through, more programmatic setup, and not just overall guidance. That's going to cost more money out of the ESSER fund. Okay, and I know that there's going to be a question about, well, that was one-time money. That's for next year. What are we going to do after that? And I will talk about that in a minute. Okay. Lastly, on the left side, special education program manager. This program manager is going to do a lot of the work around supporting our staff within the IEP writing and the IEP processes. Looking at our birth to 3 and our child find, what our child, when we do talk about our child find, I know I don't have the name of it right off the top of my head, but the activity that we do in this district, I forget the name of it, but we called it Early Learning Play Days in Richland, where we would have families come in and engage in play activities, but then assess them to see whether or not they were in need of early services or not, and tracking. What's the name of the program?
Children's Fair.
Thank you, Children's Fair, which is why it wasn't in my head. But
We have it written down.
what?
You have it written down.
I know, but it's in a list of a whole bunch of stuff, and I'm not trying to read off the slide. I'm trying to speak as clearly as I can with what I know. So, in that regard, that would support that, along with our Medicaid billing and some other things. That would give a lot of support to this person. Okay, so that's what I'm proposing right now is the need. So permission to move ahead means this.
So
Yep.
the yellows are what you're looking for.
The yellows are what I'm looking for. The green is something that we've already applied money towards. It's just how we're going to finalize that.
So four positions. Yellow.
4 yellow positions is what I'm looking to change. Also, I'm looking to change job descriptions and titles of the upper line there.
And special programs like, or Avid, where would that fall under? The coordinator of that?
Yep. So if you're looking at Avid and other things, it's going to fall under the director of curriculum and instruction. Okay.
Oh, yeah, I see.
To what extent the coordinator gets involved in helping with that, that would be as a team how they parse out the workload. Okay.
Help me understand a little bit, Jared, that you have director of special education, and then you have special education program managers. You have a director and a manager, one to one. How do their roles? No, I'm trying to put this in a linear word chart. Help me understand how their roles are then uniquely different.
So the way in which the responsibility over the programming is. In this case, you'll see that there are specific programs that we picked out and or functions. For instance, we have IEP reviewer. One coordinator to review over 600 IEPs is probably fairly difficult. I'm going to tell you that. Okay, I'm not telling you we're bringing you the best or everything that's needed here. But I am telling you that a large function of the role of this person will be helping with that paperwork process, reviewing IEPs, making sure that dates are being followed, as well as some of the admin assistant in that area to make sure IEPs are scheduled and we continue through the process in a timely manner. So it's going to be really at the start, making sure we're laying out those responsibilities. And so that's why I'm saying as we move forward here, we need to finalize some new job descriptions if I have permission to move forward with this. Again, this would be the first budget decision made for the 23-24 budget. If this is a priority, we will make sure that it happens and it happens in an overall budget neutral aspect. Not asking for us to put more money to the budget at all. I'm just asking us to make this be the first financial decision, others to follow that will also support the financial decision you make as you build the budget starts putting a box around other decisions that you have to make until you get to a budget that is acceptable. And I say acceptable because we know that we're not looking for a balanced budget, because we know that over the past few years and with our referendum, we've been putting money aside in our fund balance to be able to run in a deficit for a year or two, to see where the state budget aligns us or where we need to go in the future. So we've been very good fiscal stewards. We know that we're going to go into a budget deficit for next year, but I'm saying I don't want the deficit to include the deficit we were aiming at plus $600,000. I'm saying we're going to shift things around to make sure we're still at the budget that we were looking at, where we were planning, and you guys know what those numbers are because fiscals had a chance to look at them. Last year, you had examples of what those look like, and we're on a path already for that. But we do need to make sure that we put job descriptions together, have them come through HR, so you get some finalized detail that you're not getting tonight. We're gonna have to put a new org chart in to give you some of that finalized detail, Dave, that you were just asking about. How does that look? We need to start posting these positions. The reason I'm coming to you today and saying we need to put this on the front end of our priorities is two things. One, you asked me, what do we need? I'm telling you what I think we need based on everybody I heard from. Two, we're in a hiring time where we need to move the process forward. We can't wait for the state budget to be finalized because that may be October. If we think this is important, and I tell you we can do it by moving around what we need to within the budget, then I think we're positioned to move, which means posting these positions as soon as we feel comfortable that we're going to give you a job description that you're okay with. Okay? And then final board resolutions will come around the hiring and those policy org charts and or job descriptions. You'll have resolutions that you'll be passing along the way as we move into the hiring process for these. Dave?
Conceptually, no issue with the budget neutral addition of the 4 yellow boxes, and try not to get too deep in the weeds, but I see that under curriculum, you have mental health intervention, mental health, and yet restorative practices, responsive classrooms, et cetera, are under special education. Is mental health the best spot for curriculum silo, or is that, I mean, am I missing?
It depends on what side of the silo you're talking about. If you're talking about programmatic supports, okay, a lot of times those happen under
Curriculum.
no,
Oh,
the other side.
okay.
If you're talking about what skills students need to learn, like within the
okay.
second step program or health class or other mental
Okay.
health supports, they may be there.
Okay.
Okay, so you're gonna see it on both sides, because again, when we talk about things like, I heard Diana say in her speech, the whole child, we're not just talking academically and we're not just talking on the other side. In here, it has an address to both. Okay? I'm actually hoping that one of the inputs that we get from revenue is around mental health supports, because that's been talked about quite a bit on both sides of the aisle. Okay? Now, I can't count on anything coming from the state, and I'm needing to tell you that whether it comes or doesn't come, if we make this a priority, we will move things around, and this is the first choice that we've made for the next year's budget.
Okay. And then just a comment, I'm appreciative of the way you put the presentation together and what you used for your inputs and how you came to your conclusions. So thank you for framing it that way.
The last thing I need to share with you is that I said, we certainly didn't give you the Cadillac version, but you all know there are other things that we discussed around this table and other places. I got people here in the crowd who really know technology well, and they know where we are with technology. And if we decide to go to one-to-one programming, which we're trying to aim for, we're going to need some more technology support in reference to maybe having a technology coach. At our last special meeting last week, we talked about math being a high priority as well as literacy. We have literacy coaches in our district. We need to look at and think about how can we help in that regard. I told you that 600 IEPs is a lot to review. We may look at another additional support there. The scope of the K-12 curriculum in general, I know this being a former director of curriculum instruction that was in charge of a K-12 whole level of curriculum and supports past that, that does take a lot of support. And then as our campus is growing, and we see it growing quite a bit by leaps and bounds this year, and especially if we offer it to more international students, looking at somebody who can be an e-campus principal of that school, when you're talking about the number of enrollments, might be something we need to look for in the future. So this is not just a one-year look. I'm presenting something to you of how we move forward next year. It may be 3 to 5 years of an approach here that we are looking at as we continue supports, as we continue to listen to different people throughout the community, through our schools, our parents, our staff, our students, to make sure that we continue these supports. I'm just telling you what I've heard now and how I think we need to move for next year. Hoping I have your permission to move forward.
So I'm gonna jump in here, that's right. Couple thoughts. Again, I've been here 9 years. Fundamentally, our structure is what it was 9 years ago. True. At the level we're talking about here, our structure is what it was 9 years ago. Our program is not where it was 9 years ago. We have introduced a number of things. We've identified areas we need to go. And so I'm telling myself, like, this change is necessary in this area simply because our structure is fundamentally out of date with what we are doing and with what we want to do. So I believe this is very much aligned fundamentally with the change that the board was expecting to see starting to move this year. So we knew change was coming. We know change is necessary. I fully expect, again, capturing this last comment, this is year one. It will change. The one thing I can guarantee is that whatever we think about is year two of this, it's not what year two is going to be. Right? It's going to continue to change and evolve. I certainly hope it will, because that's going to make it successful. I strongly appreciate it's been presented as budget neutral. I believe in that, and I'm prepared to make that commitment here as our first budgetary decision, realizing that begins to put constraints around other things we could potentially do next year. I'm definitely on board with that. And as much as we have squeezed as much as we can from everybody here, in the end, as he has outlined, there are gaps we know there are there right now. And those gaps are not because people haven't been trying to fill them. They've been trying. There's just only so much you can ask the same group of people to do within the prior roles and structures. This is not a question of will, and this is not a question of capability. It's a matter of having the resources in the right areas. And every time we've asked people to stretch themselves, realize that, well, that may not have had a financial cost, it had an opportunity cost. Because all the time they spent trying to split their day to cover these areas, that meant there was something else they couldn't focus on. So I think it's important for us to recognize the support doesn't just create lift in the areas that we've identified. The support creates lift throughout the organization because people whose attention and energy has been split will now be able to have more focus. And we've been asking for that as a board quite a bit, focus and change. I think there's this movement that is in that direction. Diana?
I have a couple questions. The first is on the chart itself. When we look at the Director of Innovation Strategy, Data and Technology, I understand how K-12 STEM and the charter schools fall under that because it's innovation, yet they've been around for a while. So is it truly innovation anymore? But on a deeper lens, when you look at the job descriptions post for each of those, I don't know how it would fit under there, and we don't have to have that discussion right now, it's just posing it out there as a question. Is it more under a curriculum and instructional piece as opposed to looking at data and so on? I understand that, yes, it fits under the technology, but given what those directors are doing, I'm not sure I see the connection that's there, and that just might be a conversation that we need to have deeper.
Okay.
My second piece is looking at if we are moving forward and we talk about new job descriptions for HR. I'm a timeline person, I'm a structure person. We meet with HR the middle of April. So then if that is approved in HR, would that then come to board for resolution? So then hiring could come after the April board meeting, or is it after HR approves that? I guess I'm just looking, this is prime time for hiring.
I guess what I was saying is, if you say we're going down this path, and I think you have enough information to understand the general direction we're going in. And we're not gonna come back with a wildly different job description, right? We need to move forward, as we are doing these processes together. Because we can't wait until May for all the approvals to happen and then start in on that process. We will miss good candidates.
You want to get them make it.
So what you're-
They're under policies and they gotta have 2 readings and everything else. So.
What you're describing is job descriptions to HR in April, and you start the hiring process once that review of those job descriptions has happened. And the next time it comes before the full board is when you've got a name to attach to a role and you're presenting for contract approval.
Correct.
And then there probably is,
That's
even
how I
after
heard
that, the policy actually catches up and say, here's the approved job description.
I just wanted to make sure that I
Well,
heard it correctly.
the policy is the org chart.
Right.
Yeah, but there's policies on each of these job
That's true, on the direct
descriptions.
level.
I mean,
Direct level.
we're essentially hiring under a draft job description, and that's happened before, where, sometimes the rest of the things have to catch up, right? But we know what we're looking for, and we can explain to our candidates what we're looking for.
Is there a resolution or a consent agenda item that's coming before us regarding this tonight, or?
Does it need one? I guess it's a bigger
You
question.
should have formal action, so there's not a resolution currently listed, but a vote can occur after this discussion. So thank you, good procedural question. Other comments or questions on the presentation?
I make a motion to instruct the administration to continue as proposed.
I second.
Okay. Moved by Dave. And seconded by Diana. Okay. Move ahead as proposed. Okay. Comments or questions on the motion? Hearing none, roll call vote, please.
Mike Higgins,
Yes.
Lori Collins,
Yes.
Diana Johnson,
Yes.
Tina Johnson. That's right, David Trader,
Yes.
David Smith,
Yes.
Doug Will,
Yes.
Craig Wortman,
Yes.
Tony Annette.
Yes, and the motion carries. Thank you.
Well, thank you guys. It's gonna help quite a bit.
This is the easy part.
Okay. Our next item up under reports, the superintendent report.
Yes, that's me again.
It is.
My report for March, first of all, great recognition goes out to all the students who were in the performance and the crew that helped the performance. I'm sorely, I'm sad I missed it because I'm hearing it's so good. As you guys know, I was not able to go to the performance because I was ill. But this year's performance of the musical Legally Blonde, I hear went off well. There was even some question as to some of the content, but I heard overwhelmingly that even though it was somewhat questionable content, the way it was portrayed and displayed at the musical was outstanding, at least from what I've heard. Secondly, special recognition to staff members, Reed Ledoux, Scott Meyer, and Ryan Moldenhauer. They, again, feedback from the students, and I know a couple of them through this student Rotary organization, a couple of the leads, talking about just how much these staff members and other people, other adults and other volunteers who contributed to the show were so much of the success of the show. Just amazing discussion about how they were supported. So congratulations to them, and they absolutely deserve that recognition. It was a stellar performance from what I hear. Really missed out. Other opportunities that we had Job Olympics. Job Olympics is a job fair, and we have high school students who are transition students and or intellectually disabled and or students with autism. We have a job fair that Taylor created just for them. It's my first time going to this, of course, first time in the district, but I have not even seen this in other districts where the district, as well as organizations like ADRC, which is the Aging and Disability Resource Center, and other agencies got together and held this job fair at MATC. Students participated in job skills performances, as well as mock interviews, and had some speakers speak to them about job availability and other things. It was just outstanding, and I just want to say it was a great opportunity for these students. Also, we had a high school career fair in our main high school. We had a number of vendors. Can't recall off the top of my head, but I believe, do you remember how many?
A little bit over 50.
Over 50 vendors there. I'm hearing a lot, I heard from about 4 or 5 vendors specifically who thought this year's career fair, and we've been doing the career fair for a number of years in conjunction with our chamber, thank you, to put this on, but a number of our vendors were saying how even though there were maybe fewer vendors, the students felt like much more engaged, much more prepared, and much more involved. And I think I can give some credit to some of our AVID strategies and school-wide strategies that we're trying to implement on that to truly try to engage students more in that school to career and school to college to prepare for career pipeline. And like I said, when I went around and talked with different vendors, it was great to see that. I also got to talk to some of our state apprenticeship people, and I found out that we are one of the highest participating school districts. So this is a pat on the back to our employers, as well as our school, to put placements of students out there and to give them those opportunities to apprentice. We almost have 100 students this year. The next closest in around the area was Fort Atkinson with like 72. We're like maybe 3 or 4 short from 100, and we were trying to get that goal of 100 by the end of March, and we still have a couple of days to get there. But if we can get those placements, that would be a really huge benefit to our students and our businesses for that. But I just want to say congratulations to the chamber and our staff and the businesses for putting together what I thought was a great opportunity for students as I went around and stopped and met with vendors and talked with them too. It was a good morning for that to happen. Also, another opportunity, Panda Day was last Thursday. Panda Day happens at Lincoln STEM program. And at Lincoln, they use this as a students and staff engagement day. There are all sorts of activities they do centered around Panda. And as you guys know, their logo is a Panda bot. But one of the things that I saw that I took special note of is a engineering feat to put together the tallest piece of bamboo And so the students had to use materials created and collated for them to see what they needed to do to try to get the tallest freestanding piece of bamboo. It was kind of a neat lesson that went along with this. And of course, you can see the fun festivities that were there, and all the student pride, student pride that was worn on their shirts and everything else. It was a good activity that happened last week in that program. And then lastly, some important reminders. No school starting the 27th, which is next week, through the 31st. Also, April 7th is Good Friday. And then the listing of April committee and board meetings. I do want to make a quick mention that we do have a special meeting tomorrow night as well, for those of you who said you could make it. So I appreciate just reminding you of that. Lastly, Skills USA, a really important date for them is the 25th of March. That is their annual Skills USA push lawnmower drop off. There has been some questions if you can take your rider over there, but this is for your push mowers. But they take in almost hundreds of push mowers, and
They take rototillers.
oh, do they? You gotta know the right person, right? But they get them all ready and do that. I'm gonna take some of the time to go help and support that. If you have time to help and support, please do that over a break because that's when they're doing the main workings. But to sign up for a lawnmower drop off is the 25th. So make sure you do that ahead of time. Any other questions? Yeah.
None of the questions. Want to mention one other thing that transpired since our last board meeting, which is that our bowling team,
Oh, that's right.
high school bowling team, are the state champs.
Awesome. Yes.
That championship occurred the weekend, I believe it was the 3rd and 4th. Went off to what's called a roll-off. You know about a roll-off in bowling. It was exciting. That was the semifinals. I think they had a roll-off in the 9th and 10th frame, and then went on to win the championship on Sunday. So we are king of the lanes. Congratulations to that team. They earned it.
I would be remiss if I didn't share an important date that Drive Your Tractor to School Day is tomorrow at WHS. So be sure to take pictures.
Outstanding.
Can I have one other really cool piece of information? The basketball teams have just finished their seasons, and the girls team, there's an academic component to that, an all-state academic, and both the boys and the girls had about 80% or more of their athletes score 3.5 cumulative or higher. The girls had a higher percentage than the boys, so I have two kids that both are boys. But the boys actually had the highest overall cumulative GPA percentage-wise, all of D2 across the state of Wisconsin. So kudos to them, and we don't always hear the recognition, but they put a lot of time and energy on the court, but they also put a lot of time and energy in the classroom.
As I repeatedly tell my teams, you're student athletes. The student comes first. So
And
that
and
shows-
obviously, they're getting that message across at the high school, so.
And then what about Megan Doherty? I heard about her. Did she get an award or something, or? I missed this.
She just competed down south, I don't remember which state.
Right.
She is very, very big in ag.
Oh,
And so she had done one of the competitions there. We have a number of students that are going to sectionals over break and some other things in FFA, but she just had, if you don't remember off the top.
That's all. That's okay.
All right.
We can't always get all the wonderful recognition.
Yeah, well, it's nice to get.
They're highlights of the wonderful recognition.
Set them up and knock them down.
Yep.
That concludes my report. I forgot to say that.
All right, fiscal management. No, make him do the last one.
Now.
Yeah,
Make him do the last one.
Dog.
I don't want to take it from you.
Go ahead, Sheila. Go ahead.
So we had a fiscal management meeting last Wednesday and went over the payment report. There were a few questions about that. We discussed some Amazon detail that was provided at this meeting for the first time. And we went over the variance report We talked a little bit about how overtime's a little high, and that's really because we've been short-staffed in certain areas. So some staff that we currently have are making up the difference. Hopefully that's going to be resolved pretty soon. We're seeing a little bit of movement and getting some positions filled, but we still do have some open positions in different departments. We talked about expenditures over $20,000. There were 2 this month. The first was for the metal fiber optic laser CNC table, which is a resolution later on in the meeting. And the other was a agreement between the district and USI, which is a part of our contract. So it's just a renewing of an agreement that we have with them for brokering our employee insurance. And that does not need to go to resolution. We went through 2 different financial forecast projections, so 5-year projections. One that was kind of showing maybe the toughest budget situation we would have for next year, where maybe we would have no increase in revenue, we would have declining enrollment, things like that, what that would look like for 5 years. And then another one that included all of the different proposals from Governor Evers' budget proposal. So we looked at those 2, and next month we'll probably look at one that's maybe somewhere in the middle of those 2. We had a presentation by Mrs. Riedel about the interest rates for district accounts. So for the last couple of years, interest rates have been so low, we haven't had to put a lot of effort into getting higher rates, but now those are going up. And so she's been doing a lot of work making sure that we are maximizing the interest that we're earning on the district bank accounts. And then finally, Josh Carter, our Buildings and Grounds Director, gave an update on some of the projects that are going on. So he was talking about the AC project that's going on. He met with the different project contractors, and he gave a timeline update too on where we are for the pool boiler for the middle school, the gym floor, and the gym bleachers. So the pool is also going to be shut down in April for a scheduled annual cleaning. And then the meeting adjourned at 7:40.
Comments or questions on that report?
I have one comment on the interest rates, with the banking system, how it is now. We have 3, right, Sarah? 3 different entities we utilize for our money that we put in. And there was some discussion on like a $7 million one coming due and what to do with it. So I was just gonna ask the board what they thought of maybe having 4 entities instead of 3, diversing a little more. We didn't, it came up that night, so I don't know if there's anything. Stacy was asking for some guidance, wasn't she? Somewhat a little bit
Yeah,
on that.
we were kind of talking about using the local bank versus using some different ones that we get better returns on.
Right.
We talked about that, and then as you said, we have a couple of CDs that are
Coming
going to
due.
open up. They're coming, yeah, and so kind of, do we want to lock those funds up again or not?
Right.
That's what we were talking about.
So it would be just, she was looking for some guidance. I'm just throwing that out there right now. I don't know if there's anything we need to do. I was just bringing that extra portion up on the interest. So.
So initiating that or transferring the money, would that require board approval in that circumstance involve a new entity? Not normally.
I don't know for sure.
Yeah.
If we have a brand new.
In terms of starting up a new relationship, I don't
I
know.
think it depends on what we're securing. I mean, if it's a CD or something like that, there's a possibility.
It was just my thought of being more diversified. You hear about what's happening in these banks.
So all 3 entities that we're utilizing
Are strong.
are very strong.
Right now,
Yeah.
so there doesn't have to be anything, but there was one $7 million one coming in, I believe, right? Wasn't that amount? So,
I do say that in the recent audit report, it did mention something about, risk associated with that. So you have a valid concern.
and it doesn't have to be done right now or anything. I'm just bringing it up to the board that it will be coming due sometime down the road. So,
I would not, I don't think we need to constrain ourselves to local entities. And if we can get a noticeably higher rate from a non-local entity, we should pursue it. That's my perspective.
Didn't the one we used too, if I remember right, when it was offered at a lower rate, kind of matched some of the local entities we have been using, or gave us options to meet or exceed interest rates provided elsewhere as well, so. I mean, there are those options as well.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other comments or questions in that report? Nope. All right. HR, since Tina had to meet because of a conflict, hand it over to you.
So we had our meeting on Monday, March 13th at 5:30 PM. We had a compressed time period, but nevertheless accomplished all of our work very efficiently. We discussed the consent agenda, which is included on tonight's resolution, hires, appointments, resignations, terms. And then we also have the first summer school staff resolution for approval this evening, where we reviewed the summer school staff resignations and appointments. We did talk a little bit about getting some advance notice of the plans for summer school. We have that added to our planning agenda for next summer, so that we're in on the front end in terms of what the plans for staffing are for summer school for next summer. We also talked a little bit about the different types of academic classes that are offered for both advanced learners as well as those that are participating at other levels of the educational continuum. And we talked a little bit about ESSER funds for summer school learning opportunities. We moved on to approving the timeline for the school perceptions employee satisfaction survey that was approved at last month's board meeting. We'll be running that survey from April 25th until May 9th. And then we did talk a little bit quickly about our agenda planning for next month. We will make up a time we gave up from this month's meeting. Next month, we'll have a legal presentation by Dan Bleet from Bureau Better on the overall contracting process for both teachers and administrators. We anticipate our initial discussion of the staffing plan for next year at the school level. And then we'll talk more about the consent agenda and summer school. Sounds like we also, based on the activity of the board tonight, will have some job descriptions that we will be doing a first cut review at for next month. And then our meeting agenda ended at 5:48 PM. And our next meeting is Monday, April 17th, right here at 5:30 PM.
All right. Questions on that? No? All right. Thank you. Ed Services?
Yes, Ed Services met on Tuesday, March 7th. Committee members were present, Lori Holland, Dave Smith. Diana Johnson was not present. Several others were in attendance. First item that we discussed was the social emotional learning curriculum renewal, which is paid for with the DPI mental health grant for $33,000 over a 5-year period. Generally, the discussion was to move that forward for resolution. There was some question as to its efficacy, and we're still waiting for some data on some survey results, incident rates, et cetera, to I'm going to say support or at least to show how it's impacted and had success. We didn't have that at the time of the meeting minute completion, nor do we have it tonight. Nonetheless, the resolution's on there. And it's a fairly straightforward pay to provide grant, but we can talk about it more at that time during the resolution. There was also a discussion on the infrastructure for one-to-one Chromebook. This was debated whether or not it was appropriate for fiscal, given that it was infrastructure. So we kicked that aspect of it over to the fiscal committee when they take it up. However, we did have Dave Lockstein in the room, and we discussed all the pros and cons from educational and delivery perspective and how it would change how we do business in the classrooms, total cost, implementation, any PD that was required. No action was taken on that, merely a discussion. However, we'll take it up again
assuming that it is approved by fiscal. And then lastly was the eCampus Academy, an international program and an opportunity to partner with Pathways Academy. A lot of discussion. Nobody really saw that there was a downside to it, with the exception of potentially growth or diminishing our quality. We asked Dave Vitale to put together a budget, which he did do. It was in my possession as well as Tony's and Jared's. Unfortunately, it did get lost in my mailbox. I did not send it out to the rest of Ed Services. Yeah, there's a lot of things.
Can
in
we
my
fire
inbox.
you?
I'm sorry, you can.
We'll be careful.
Yeah, nonetheless, it's still, as anticipated, it's all in the black. It's difficult to charge that much per person and provide services at 60 to 1 without covering your cost, even at the break points of additional staffing that may be needed at distances in the future. That also is on a resolution tonight, and I'm sure we could share that break-even analysis to the screen if we needed to, Dave. Either I can send it to Lynn or to Jared, or get it read into the minutes if that's necessary. Otherwise, next meeting is on April 11th.
All right, thank you. Any questions on that report? Policy review.
No policy meeting, same as last time. However, I think that we did have the one that was for a major revision past legal. That was on the bullying. That was put forth prior to the February meeting, and I don't know if there was any changes to it, significant.
There weren't significant changes, but you can see the changes in the document.
Okay, there you go.
And that's gonna go for first reading tonight.
Right, yep, I saw that on the agenda, so I figured it passed, but I didn't memorize what was put forth and what was modified. So that one was championed by Lori, and the next one's up are Tina, not Diana, no, Diana, right, I thought so.
Diana and Tina both have.
I think Tina.
No, Tina's next in line.
Tina's
Tina's
next,
next in line.
She has.
I don't understand the first versus second.
Right, yeah.
Hers is further down.
Hers is further down the pike, but.
Grading systems and reporting to parents, right?
Yeah, that's me.
That's
Diana. And she's extracurricular.
And she's extracurricular.
Extracurricular.
Yeah, and then after that, it's Craig with policies regarding retention. Next meeting on that is in April, 12th.
Yes.
Yep. Got it.
All right, planning?
Yeah, planning, we had our meeting on March 8th, and we had all committee members were present except for Lori Holland, and then we also had Diana Johnson, Superintendent Burke, and then Doreen Dembski from D&D Communication Services did her presentation to us, discussed about the communication audit process, and she was gathering information of what our, from the members of the board, what we thought were high priority areas to communicate with. So it was just pretty straightforward. And that was it. So that's all we discussed on the plan. And it concluded at, I don't know what time it concluded. It was like 7:40 or so. And the next meeting will be May 10th at 5:30. So.
Comments or questions on that report? All right, thank you. Next is the consent agenda, resolution 9186. The consent agenda includes the board minutes, our committee summaries, personnel and staffing changes. That includes appointments, resignations, retirements, the approval of bills, first reading of policies and second reading of policies. As noted, there is one first reading up this evening, and there are a number of second readings up as well. Do I hear a motion on 9186?
So moved.
Second. Moved by David, seconded by Mike. Comments or questions on the motion? Craig?
So, specific to the meeting minutes regarding the eCampus Academy and the Education Services Committee. My question to the committee members, do you feel like these minutes accurately reflect the reservations expressed in the discussion?
Such as?
Because I also attended that meeting, and I felt like there were some other questions as far as funding sources and things of that nature, that are probably not reflected accurately in the meeting minutes. The other question I have would be, do you feel like this resolution for eCampus that comes before us tonight regarding this discussion is a recommendation of the committee?
I believe it to be.
I was a little confused. I thought we were gonna get some more information.
Right.
And I didn't know you got.
No, I got it on
information.
Thursday afternoon, and I was out of town until
Right. So
whenever.
it's hard to.
Because I guess I didn't get that sense based on the discussion. I felt like there was enough reservation as far as the cost and the growth of the program that it was going to come back before the committee. And I believe that there is a general belief that when things of this nature come before the committee, that and then get forwarded onto the board, that has been somewhat fully vetted and a full discussion has been made, and that the committee is bringing it forward as a recommendation, and that means something. I just wanted to double check if the sentiment of the committee happens to be such that this is a recommendation for the board to consider.
Well, we can discuss it again now, given that Diana wasn't present and Dave and I and Lori were as the committee members. And I appreciate that there was the question regarding the break-even analysis or the cost to serve.
And I just sent that.
And Dave had sent it, but only to, I guess, executive committee, if you want to call it that, or executive, myself, Tony and Jared, maybe somebody else. But even with that, I don't think that even at that time, Craig, even though that we were interested in what that would show, there was nowhere in there where the cost per student as well as the cost per teacher would ever cause it to go negative. We had some discussion regarding making sure that we were able to continue the quality of the program.
So,
and who would management and who would it fall underneath. But I never considered the fiscal aspect to be one of concern, given that the math and the, what do you want to call it, the contract or the memorandum of understanding would prevent it ever from going negative. Therefore, I wasn't, never considered that it shouldn't be a resolution, although I do admit that we were hoping to have that and I should have forwarded it. Dave, you could have different impression on it, Lori.
Well, I think for this moment, at the stage we're at, it's the approval of the minutes. I think that, well, the minutes probably could have always be done slightly better. I'm sure.
Minutes can always be.
It was representative
Yeah.
of the discussion. I
There
don't
you
see
go.
any major holes in that. I think if we want to
Fair
have
enough.
discussion over the motion.
There's probably holes in a lot of committee minutes, some language that was left out.
Okay.
So,
I just said asking the question because I didn't get the impression that was the entire discussion that was had regarding the reservations that was discussed about
I
eCampus.
think when that motion comes up, there may be more discussion, but
I'd like to piggyback quickly on Craig's comment, though, not regarding this specific, but I have questions in the past minutes, being that they are very general, very 10, 20,000 mile overview, and don't always reflect some of the discourse or whatever going through. And I don't know the proper procedure protocol, but I know if I'm not attending, when I read the minutes and try to figure out how things went, is it really giving an accurate view, or is my job as a board member to go back and watch the video? So I guess I'm questioning or throwing out an idea of what's best for us as board members, as writing the committee minutes. How can we best be transparent about what's happening within, so that way non-committee members feel they have that.
So, not getting too much into this, short of a verbatim transcript of a recording, I think there's very little you can do to try and figure out where do they start, where do they stop, and where do they start, because it would forever become an argument of, well, why didn't you include what, these 3 words that I said? I thought those were the most important 3 words I said the entire meeting, and you didn't include those. It doesn't work.
Okay.
But I mean, I get your point of, they have to have enough detail to give you a sense of it, particularly not for, here's the word, particularly not just for you as a board member who wasn't there, but for the board member 5 years from now,
Correct.
that looks back at when we made, 4 years from now, looks back when none of us are here for whatever reason, and says, okay, what was considered when we looked at this contract 4 years ago? And you have to have enough of that historical sense to it, because frankly, for you and I, you can do what I did, which is like, call David.
Right.
And I said, what, can you give me a little more detail of what the discussion was like, because I couldn't attend it. They did. Because that's what we did. Or review the recording, but the essence of it, I've run into this repeatedly of being in our role and having to look back on a historical decision. And there was certainly a time and place where the general approach to minutes was record only the actions taken verbatim for the action taken, and no context at all. And that's not good. But neither can you, just reach a point in which, again, all it's going to do is break down over an argument over why didn't you pick my words versus those words. Like it's just not helpful at that point. So
This is one more area that I would advocate for WASB to come in and do some training.
So
I think the one area that gets me is when, and we're getting better at it every day, but that we have information that's shared at a committee. And then if that information isn't fully in the board docs at least. And then there's a committee summary that says very little.
Yeah.
And then there's a resolution that says, as presented at the committee. Right. And then you're like, hold on, what was presented at the committee? Well, we don't have good documentation, but we document what's at the committee. So that's my concern, is that when we have resolutions that just say what was done at the committee, and what was done at the committee is not documented well. I don't think this is the case, but.
Well, now I do think that this is the case.
And that's when we should clean up the resolution. When we get there.
We can discuss that when the resolution comes up as well.
Okay. Other comments or questions on the resolution with the consent agenda, 9186?
I have, it's, for when we have a first reading,
Yes.
it will not go back to policy, or?
That is correct, unless there's
Okay.
substantial changes by this board
Right,
in
okay.
editing
I get a
that
little
between the
confused
first
on
and
that
second,
process.
it does not go back.
Okay, and the changes were the attorney changes, there was
That's
no
correct.
reason to have, okay.
They reviewed the policy. basically.
It looked like there was maybe like some double wording, so they maybe took it out, I don't see anything that,
It wasn't substantial.
no, I mean, when I first read it, I'm like, wait, what, but then
But again, I don't know what a lawyer
Right,
thinks of
what
when
they
they
see.
read it.
and
They made
it's
sure that
not
when
the
they
lawyer.
read it, it's very clear
Yeah.
legally how they're going to interpret that.
Exactly.
And that was the main gist of
No,
their
I was-
changes.
I was happy to see that it was.
Depends upon what is.
Right. What it is, yes.
Okay? Hearing nothing else, roll call vote please on the resolution, the consent agenda 9186.
Mike Higgins,
Yes.
Lori Holland,
Yes.
Diana Johnson.
Yes.
David Schrader,
Yes.
David Smith,
Yes.
Doug Will,
Yes.
Craig Wortman,
No,
and Tony Earl.
Yes, and the motion carries. This brings us to our main body of action items, starting with resolution 9187 for summer school staff for 2023. Do I hear a motion for 9187?
So moved. Second.
Moved by Diana, seconded by Lori. Comments or questions on the motion?
Not subject to any change at all, right?
Yeah, right.
All right. Hearing none, roll call vote, please.
Mike Higgins,
Yes.
Lori Holland,
Yes.
Diana Johnson,
Yes.
David Schrader,
Yes.
David Smith,
Yes.
Doug Will,
Yes.
Craig Wortman,
yes.
Tony Arnett.
Yes. And the motion carries. Next is Resolution 9188, the renewal of the Second Step Social Emotional Learning Curriculum. Do I hear a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by David, seconded by Diana. Comments or questions on the motion?
I'm sorry, who started? I was having.
That was
problems.
David and then Diana.
Thank you.
Any comments or questions on the motion? Nope. All right, roll call vote, please.
Mike Higgins,
Yes.
Lori Holland,
Yes.
Diana Johnson,
Yes.
David Schrader,
Yes.
David Smith,
Yes.
Doug Will,
Yes.
Craig Woodman,
Yes.
Tony Arnett.
Yes, and the motion carries. Next is 9189, the eCampus Academy and Pathways Academy LLC agreement. Do I hear a motion?
So moved.
Moved by David. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Dave Smith. Comments or questions on the motion?
All right, I do, one of my first questions was there additional information that the administration would like to share about this resolution?
Is it convenient to pull up the
Yeah,
names
yeah,
that you
absolutely.
prepared?
I sent several items that I thought would potentially illuminate. Oh, you want me to clean this up on the screen?
Please.
All right, okay, Tyler, you can stop sharing. Yep. All right. How am I doing, guys?
You're getting there. I heard the boom, boom.
I want to come popping on here.
Oh, I say.
I'm looking at what he sent us on the email.
There we go. Okay, got it.
So I had shared one email in the wake of the meeting on the 7th with the committee itself. It had a link to or an attached version of the agreement, the draft agreement that I had shared with David and Tony and others as well, just to give you a sense of the language, in that agreement, of course, and highlighting really what what the district's role and responsibility would be, and then the LLC, the Pathways Academy. Very typical language reviewed by our attorney, and so it's fairly standard, but I wanted to share that nonetheless because that would essentially be what we would be entering into. And then subsequent to that, shared some detail with regard to the what we do or what happens in eCampus, wherever a family is enrolled, okay, whether it's domestic, international, these things aren't separate above and beyond what we do for kids that are located within the state or within Watertown. And so obviously virtual education is distance education. So we want our kids to be located in places that are within our community, of course, if that's what serves them best, but beyond our community as well, because that's what the medium supports. And so at what I think is a lower overhead, if you will, certainly not without cost, but the ability to distribute educational opportunities, courses and resources and class work and all that kind of thing remotely And anytime, anywhere is really what this medium is set up to do. So if you're not doing that, then we're really, or if all of our students are in right across the street versus someplace else or, further out, then we may question whether there's efficacy in even putting forth this effort. Although I will say we do have several students within our district that are part of our eCampus programs. Sometimes there are students that come to us for reasons that our attorney stated earlier. Others are looking for other, supports and so forth to have their education distributed and delivered to them. So these things that you see here, these links, I won't get into them. I sent you this email, all of you, just about 10 or 15 minutes ago. I had hoped that it had gone to you last week, so I apologize.
And the original one from March 8th was sent to the committee, Dave? This section was here?
No, that was one with the agreement on it.
No,
I tend not to do, I'll tend to work with Tony and David. If that should change, then I can certainly send it out to everybody, but.
I'm saying the March 8th email that you sent the day after the meeting.
Nope, this went to you and Jared.
Yes, and then I forwarded it to the
Yes.
committee.
You did.
Correct.
Perfect.
Yeah, I sent it to the committee.
Perfect. That's
We
what I
saw
had.
that, we did not see the,
Right.
but the,
So you did
for
what
the
I asked.
budget.
Yeah, that one.
Awesome. Perfect. No, I appreciate your help on that. So I'll typically work through David, just so we know. So that has these links here. It also had what I called sort of an eCampus implementation detail. This would be the kinds of information that we would share in the agreement with the entities that we would be entering into an agreement with. And we don't even have to do an agreement. We can do individual, hey, you want to enroll in the program, here's a form to sign that upholds assurances that we have and that you have that would make this effective. Kind of like we do now with our enrollments that come to us from around the state. Okay, so this just has things like what eCampus is, what we would expect our remote families to support. One of the key components is, for example, in an international program, English proficiency. Okay, we have to ensure that there's English proficiency. Maybe you're not fluent, but you're proficient, because we can't support you with language services. That's not part of the deal. Student services of any special education nature. There's no expectation of that. And that's clearly articulated in the agreement. There has to be a local learning coach. This isn't going to work without somebody that's partnering with us remotely to ensure that students are on task and things of that nature. The market, okay, the market is homeschooled students and students that are seeking a post-secondary opportunity in the United States. So those kinds of things we articulate here. Dave, you had asked sort of like, can we come up with the components of a business plan? And so that's kind of what I put together here. So to the best that an academician can do, Dave, because you kind of zinged me on that, which is fine,
Zing me back, I don't know anything about education.
No, you do. And so you can read over that. And then this idea of this costing, this breakdown, and then some considerations. So you can dive more deeply into that if you wish. But there was some questions about, at what point do you have to, or would you add a staff member or shift? We talked about, this doesn't always mean hiring somebody new. Perhaps we look at our landscape and we say, okay, is there an opportunity for us to make a shift someplace? But you can see there, I came up with some variances or some, what did I call them? I called them differentials that take into account what our tuition is for the coming year. Those are things that we can change. I mean, I'm just looking for some dialogue in the future on a number like this that we could come up with. My research in terms of the ratios and the number came from INACOL or the Aurora Institute, which is an organization that specializes in online education internationally, certainly nationally. But so then you can see the differentials. It would be a self-sustaining, program. Some of these variances are going to, change from year to year. It depends on some circumstances. With respect to, our staffing picture, who we bring in to staff the programming and so forth. But that's in a nutshell what I shared with you. And then some considerations that I articulated here. There's no expectation of special education or language support for international students. Learning coach. Most of our learning is going to be asynchronous because of time zone differences. The main thing I tried to capture in the meeting minutes is that there was some sense that if it gets too big, what are we going to do? And so it brought to mind in January when the board approved its, and actually this came up too earlier in our conversation, when the board approved it was a resolution to adopt the thresholds for open enrollment. And you had a cap on special ed. We had it wide open for general open enrollment from anywhere in the state. So if 500 kids came in from New Lisbon versus Lisbon, I mean, it's the same kind of conundrum that you're faced with if you get big. And so that was one factor, of course, that came into play in terms of laying out these scenarios. What else? There's we mentioned in our staffing scenario here that Jared laid out for us earlier, this idea of executive assistant support that currently had been the role of Lynn, who was in the educational services office with me for many, many years. I had been serving and have been serving as the de facto campus principal and those kinds of things. So that area will continue to be one of a priority, I think. Tuition is based on 2023, 2024 levels. I'm just trying to articulate here in the considerations how I came up with the numbers at the top. And there's a ton of other things I could mention, but I thought this would get us to a point where, again, all indication is that this is something that the district, with respect to its strategic plan, was interested and continues to be interested in pursuing in terms of enrollment and revenue generation and so forth. And if I'm wrong about that, we can shift and pivot and do something else. So that's all I have to say.
Okay. I do have a prepared statement, and because I fear that sometimes my passion can kind of get the best of my ability to convey my intentions, so I'm going to try something different. So please bear with me. I was fortunate enough to attend the Education Services Committee where this was discussed. Many of the questions were raised and left unanswered. It was even made public record, documented in the meeting minutes just approved by the board. Quote, the committee is interested in reviewing estimated staffing thresholds and breakpoints with respect to increasing enrollments, quality control measures, cost and revenue estimates. Unquote. So I was surprised to see this as a recommendation tonight. Several board members have expressed a certain level of trust and reliance on the committee vetting process when a resolution comes from a committee. Questions and concerns have been satisfactorily addressed, and there's agreement among the committee that the resolution moves forward. It was not my impression that there was a level of agreement among the committee to move forward with this particular resolution. The administration has rightfully called attention to board self-evaluation and processes in my perspective. This particular process may be a reason for that policy. So I guess that we get to have that discussion tonight. In any event, fellow board members, I have to call your attention to some key details that may not be readily apparent to you on its face. I'm very concerned that we are about to make $1 million mistake. You see, what is implied from our discussion at Ed Services and this resolution is that a yes vote gives the administration full discretionary authority to set the tuition agreement amount to $3,800 per student that is not currently served by the district or even in the state. This agreement, as described, also ties us to 4 more years or more of offering services depending on how slowly paced a student takes to progress through their program. When asked about the tuition number, how it was derived, it was indicated that it was a best guess through conversation with DPI. Well, I expressed my concerns to the committee, and I will provide you with a basis for my concerns as well. I feel strongly that in order for the program to be successful and to be fair to our existing stakeholders, we have to allow due process to this discussion. So I would like to share with you a little bit of research. Keep in mind, the burden of proof is not on us board members to provide the justification and basis for this tuition number. It is on the administration to do so. I did some research. It costs local parochial schools anywhere from $6,500 to $8,000 to educate a child in a K-8 setting. That tuition is charged about 25%, while the congregation subsidizes the remaining $5,000 to $6,500 to provide that education. So between $5,000 and $6,500 in addition that the church is picking up the tab for our kids, for those kids. It costs approximately $1 million to educate those 130 kids. I know this because I pay attention to this at my church. I know the process of looking around to area congregations to verify. To verify, I know this process of looking around to area congregations to verify that our expenses and tuition rates are in line locally. So naturally, it came as a surprise when administration came with that intention that the tuition was set to cover the costs. What costs? Since there's a significant financial implication to our school district, why aren't we able to have a discussion about financial matters like this at the fiscal committee? According to our discussion at the fiscal committee, the budget projections indicate it costs nearly $15,000 per student, between $13,000 and $15,000 per student to educate them, and the eCampus members, a portion of them, are actually included in that $3,300 student district membership number. According to DPI's financial information, a full-time educator in the Watertown Unified District represents an average financial obligation of $90,000. eCampus has 12 educators. It also has shared administrators, a shared business office, shared human resources, shared building costs, IT expenses, technology costs, subscription and other program costs. Now we're adding tuition agreements to the plate of our business office. There's policies that are missing to address non-payment of tuition. Likely there will be a bad debt expense. It's not a stretch to believe that eCampus currently represents a cost of $1.5 million to operate for 180 students. So I can roughly estimate that it costs around $8,500 per student to educate them in eCampus. That means that the district and ultimately the taxpayers could be subsidizing as much as $5,000 per student, or $1 million for an additional 200 students, or $2 million for the 400 additional students discussed at the committee meeting. Why such a discrepancy? The math just doesn't work out. The most accurate information on the cost of running the program should come from our business office. The district knows the building budget, they know the wages and benefits, and they know what shared resources eCampus utilizes. Yet why hasn't this information been presented to the board for proper consideration? DPI may not have a lot of familiarity on dealing with tuition agreements and how much is appropriate for a district to subsidize the education of students outside of the system. I was under the impression that one of the primary purposes of eCampus was to allow for the district to attract open enrollments from parochial schools and Wisconsin districts, as well as homeschooled children from Wisconsin to benefit. The state provides aid of approximately $10,000 per student that open enrolls. I can see that as a model that works by covering expenses and adding to the actual number the state considers for state aid purposes. In fact, the recent audit report specifically here, it specifically mentions eCampus as a positive for future growth of the Watertown Unified School District. And that can actually attract students from outside the geographic area. In order for eCampus to successfully grow, the revenue model has not only to cover costs and expenses, but it also has to allow for additional supports like a principal as necessary. In conclusion, I like the concept of eCampus. I think that it truly can add to the financial solution to grow enrollments if we allow our due diligence to occur. We have to do it correctly. The kinds of numbers that were mentioned would possibly triple the enrollment of eCampus, but at what additional cost to our district? In order to maintain an adequate level of service, I would anticipate a much larger need for educators and other resources that have not yet been discussed. This can add an additional $1 to $2 million strain on our district when our administration has just outlined the need for an additional programming supports. I'm absolutely 100% confident that it costs the district much more than the $3,800 being proposed for tuition to educate these kids. It would be a beautiful thing if that wasn't the case, but sometimes facts are inconvenient. I believe that the true cost is likely 3 times higher than that. We cannot afford to subsidize this expense by diverting funds from elsewhere in our already strained budget. Please keep in mind, the burden of proof does not lie on us as board members to provide the justification on this number. Please don't let your emotions cloud your judgment on making a sound financial decision based on facts. We don't need to subsidize other students' education when we have so many needs right here in Wisconsin. Should there be a grant? Let's discuss that. As of now, we don't need to make a $1 to $2 million mistake at the expense of the other 3,300 students, faculty, and stakeholders that we serve. Thank you.
Thank you. Other board members with comments on the motion?
Is this where we at? This is on the motion or questions on what's
So it's
what's
on the
out
motion.
there?
Questions on the motion?
Motion second, comment, question.
Other comments or questions on the motion?
I just will have a comment that I am a little frustrated because I was at the meeting and I went round and round when I wasn't able to look at the agenda till late last night maybe. And I wasn't sure, and maybe I should have reached out and said, was there any more follow-up? So that is on me. But I was under the impression that that was going to come before the resolution. So I don't feel like I can make a decision because I got no more than I left the ed service meeting with. Does that, if that makes sense? And I understand there was a lack of communication, but I do feel like I have not.
I sent you an email on March 8th, not with the financials, but.
No, I got the breakdown of the proposal or what this all looked like.
Okay, but just not the financials.
But we had talked in the ed service that whenever you start something new, you have a business plan. And that business plan is laid out. This to me is something that deserves a business plan. I'm not saying it's good, I'm not saying it's bad. I really have no opinion because I don't have any facts, if that makes sense. So that's where I stand. It could be great, it could be financially a burden, I don't know.
Ed Services talked significantly about the fact that we don't want this to take our eye off the ball.
Right,
This is not core to our mission.
right,
The reason to do this is almost purely a financial reason. That it can be a profit center for the district to bring these funds in and not create, that profit will significantly outweigh the burdens of it. To me, this spreadsheet that they've just recently got to us and we went through shows that.
But I mean, up until right
That's-
now, I didn't have that, so
I don't disagree, but that was the dialogue that we had of this is, you gotta look at this through a different set of lenses, because this is not gonna do, it's gonna do very, very little for us hitting our core mission, other than put dollars in our pocket to help us subsidize learning for the rest of us, is the goal of it. Whether that is the way it is or isn't, that's, I mean, that's what was presented.
Sure.
I just want to add a little bit on that, which is, I actually do see it as contributing to the core of our mission. Because core to our mission of innovation and progress in the future, we have to add program capacity that steps out of the mold of I'm sitting at a desk in a classroom for 180 days a year, and by virtue of that, I've completed the requirement. We have to build up our capacity to deliver programs that can move as fast as our students want to move, and can move in as many varied directions as students want to move. We will simply not be able, as a district, to deliver everything that they can and should be able to pursue in the model that has been in place for the last 50 years. And if this program is nothing more than over time net neutral, even if essentially we plow any quote profit, I realize questions about that, back into this program, just for the purpose of building up our capacity to be able to deliver similar programs like this, it is absolutely aligned with where we need to drive as a core. The only thing I want to say is not all eCampus students are the same. There are several different audiences we currently serve. They have, frankly, several different support structures required to deliver their programs with several different cost structures. And what I've heard from the beginning of this is a very constrained definition compared to what I know is occurring for existing students in this program, particularly where it comes to that local resource that they have to have, which is a significant part of our current cost for some of our students in our program. Not all, but some. Again, every student, they're not the same. They're not the same, and the costs required to serve them are not the same.
This resolution, under my understanding, is for the international.
Yes, it is.
Not overall, correct? Okay.
Yep.
And then one of the questions that I had was, you just referenced the local learning coach.
Yeah.
And when I taught at the online school, the learning coach was, in 95% of the cases, the parent. It wasn't another teacher there. It was someone that could sit and help ensure homework's getting done, grades are there, whatever. So I'm assuming, there's a lot of assumptions in here. I'm assuming that that person will take the role. They've obviously put forth the funds to do that. So that should not be an issue as far as getting things done. Where I do have a bigger question is, and I wish we had this information ahead of time. I have a hard time making a decision when it's a financial piece, when we get it even 24 hours before, because I need to think and process. That's just me. But one piece here, it says the teachers don't prep the curriculum. That's in the considerations. Who does? Who creates the curriculum? Who preps the curriculum? If the teachers aren't doing it, is it just an online can thing? Well, that doesn't really work.
They don't create lesson plans like a typical circumstance. The Lincoln International curriculum, there's eDynamic, there's a handful of curriculum that's available to the teachers who will monitor the distribution of the content And then what we want to do is have our adults do the things that humans are really good at, and the technology do the things that the technology is really good at. So distributing content and things like that are things that the technology can do for you. What I want our teachers doing is providing feedback to the students, coaching, the things that we do well that the technology doesn't do well. They can replace a course. They can add lessons or subtract lessons that students have shown competency in an area, and they don't have to sit through the same thing that they've demonstrated competency in. So those are the things that make it a different medium and a different experience for those who choose to be part of that and experience success, or sometimes not success, because a lot of times folks think it's just going to be an easy thing to do. You know, I'm not in the building or whatever, and folks aren't tracking me down for attendance. I'm at home and so forth. But the messaging is that it's harder, and it plays a big role in our advanced learner options as well as students who struggle and maybe need a different setting to achieve their goals. So it's a lot of feedback. There's a lot of coaching, communication. It's one of the things I've stressed with our team. I want you connecting with the kids. I don't want them sitting in front of a computer all day, not interacting with people. It doesn't have to be impersonal just because it's not in person. And that's where our thinking has to move forward, I think, as we can, contemplate a changing landscape in the third decade of the 21st century. So a lot of what we do is not sustainable. And so I think that's just healthy for us to have these conversations. And the agreement is for 1 year, and if it were to be something that you shift gears on, or we want to cap enrollments because all that stuff is possible. We don't have to take a single student. We would do that because we're entering into this option possibly.
Great.
I'm trying to convey to you, to the board rather, that for every $100 that we spend, we're looking to spend, for every $100 that we're looking to spend to support eCampus, we're going to bring in 35. That's what the numbers are saying. We want to have a philanthropic discussion about whether or not we have a duty to try to educate children across the globe. Let's have that discussion. But purely, and possibly, I would argue then, well, is that really our responsibility to subsidize that education? Well, we have needs right here. We have needs to provide here. We're saying it's going to cost us $3,800. We're bringing in $3,800 in revenue. We're not recognizing any additional expenses associated with growing. And to me, there's just a lot to try to figure out yet. And I know we've worked hard on this. I appreciate that. I know that, again, I wanted to succeed. Where my stumbling block is, we should be able to have those details, those numbers, because we have to justify that to the taxpayers and the other teachers that are in the classroom, and the other students that are in the classroom. We're going, potentially, there could be a little bit of deprivation there because of a decision being made tonight. And those numbers, those breakpoint numbers, all indicate, the math indicates that it's still $3,800, whether it's one student or 500 students. There is a range, but that's what it was indicating. So don't get bamboozled by seeing big numbers. We're also spending big numbers in order to get those big numbers.
Okay. Anything else? Any other comments or questions on the motion? Roll call, please.
Mike Higgins,
Yes.
Lori Holland,
No.
Diana Johnson,
No.
David Schrader,
Yes.
David Smith,
Yes.
Doug Will,
Yes.
Craig Wharton,
No.
Tony Arnett.
to say.
Sorry.
Drum roll.
Sorry.
Is there another one?
Sorry.
Yes, and the motion carries. Lot to process there. All right. Last item is resolution 9190, purchase of metal fiber optic laser CNC table. Do I hear a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Mike, seconded by Lori. Comments or questions on the motion? Hearing none, roll call vote, please.
Mike Higgins,
Yes.
Lori Collins,
Yes.
Diana Johnson,
Abstain.
David Schrader,
Yes.
David Smith,
Yes.
Doug Will,
Yes.
Craig Wortman,
Yes.
Tony Bennett.
Yes, and the motion carries. This brings us to the second opportunity for public input. If there are members of the audience, either in person or virtual, that would like to be heard on the board on anything, please.
Hi, I'm Fred Yant, 869 Briar Court, Watertown. I wanted to commend the board on its use of technology and advancement in recent years. Board docs especially has been amazing. Just the access to the board and its materials, like board policy 8524, the board clerk shall cause a complete and accurate set of minutes to be recorded for each regular and special board meeting. The minutes shall constitute the official record of proceedings of the board and include the substance of all actions taken by the board at the meeting, including the subject matter of any motion the person's making, seconding the motion, and the votes taken on the motion. The minutes shall not present value judgments as to any reports or presentations made at the meeting, and shall not make an attempt to include a complete description of all discussion engaged at the meeting. Being able to have that information and knowledge at my fingertips on my phone in the audience is excellent. I appreciate that. Continue good work. Thank you.
Anyone else? Anyone online? No? All right. Regarding agenda planning, I did not do through the course of our discussion items that need to be referred to future agenda. Did I miss anything?
You want to just speak to the process with elections and so forth over the next year or so, maybe for committee structure and so forth a little bit, so people can think about that as many people on the board?
So in the past, what has occurred is that we'll have an election on a Tuesday. Whoever is elected is elected. Committees will continue as they were for the April meetings. Doug, I will cover fiscal in your absence. The board will hold in the April meeting. April meeting will start with our organizational. During those organizational tasks, the board will select a board president, a board vice president, a treasurer, a clerk. Then in the past, the pattern has been for the board president after that meeting to circulate to the board members and ask for your interest in committees. And then for the board president to prepare a roster for the board committees, which now includes chairman, and to announce those appointments prior to the May committee meetings starting. So there's a tight window there between our April board meeting and when those appointments need to occur. So that has been the past pattern. Unless the board wishes to have something different, I would expect that it would occur the same way. All right. Then I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So, second.
Wow, finally, people are eager to make a motion.
I paused.
We do need to actually take the vote on.
Okay. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? I stand adjourned. Craig.